Okay, we should be live. This should be episode 27, Monty, of Summoning Insight. Different border, different home, different Thorin. Well, maybe not, but sort of different a little bit. We'll see how it goes. I won't hype it up at all. Now, before I introduce everything here, actually, I'll just introduce it. There's no guest, so it's just me and you. So I'm Thorin. I work for, well, I don't really. No one knows where I work. I do work. That's all we know. I'm sort of like Banksy. I just do work. Some people get to see it, but no one really knows who I am or what my purposes are, my agenda and all that stuff.
Except you're a lot more attention-seeking than Banksy is.
Apparently, yeah. I don't know about that. I just try and do what I can, Monty. So you're my co-host, obviously, MonteCristo. You still work for the same person, right? You still work for OnGameNet?
Well, my contract expires soon, so, hopefully next year I'll work for OnGameNet. I'm not trying to create anything.
No.
I probably will work for OnGameNet next year. It's just not a totally done deal.
If you see this episode, like within a couple of days, GPL, just get that money out and just ship some of that long paper over, and who knows?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. LPL, GPL. I haven't signed a contract yet, so
Till he signs on that dotted line, there's nothing official. So anyway, to start the show off, Monty, I thought we'd actually reference the past. I mean, we never do that on this show, right? Just bring the past in and things. So actually, I often, believe it or not, people won't believe this. People think this show's like scripted, which is like a laughable concept, right? But obviously, I just make up a lot of the shit I say on the spot, and I don't really put that much thought into it. I just say it, and if it's funny,
it shows. It shows.
In many ways, that just shows how I'm carrying this show, just like impromptu, stream of consciousness. Okay, fair enough. So, but actually, whenever I do those intros, I actually never think those up. Like, I never think up like a diss for someone. I just think up something funny on the spot to like break the ice and bring them in. So on the beginning of the episode, the last one, episode 26, we had Freeze on. And since the famous stereotype with Freeze is like, oh, there's the Freeze curse. And, if you're like Mithy and Nuke Duck and those guys, like even if your career's going really well, if you play with Freeze, like you're fucked. Like at that point, like someone's going to leave the team, someone's going to get banned, you're not going to get else. Like the curse always gets you, right? You can never survive if you're with Freeze. So as a joke, I opened the show by saying like, oh, I guess like after this show, I'll probably be fired from OnGamers. Like I won't be able to work there anymore. Like I won't even be able to work in LCS. Like I'll have to do a talk show about like Challenge League or something. I obviously said it as a joke, but you know what? You never taunt the spirits, Monty. I thought I was like a materialist or something, but I've learned a great deal of respect for like the spirit world and like other ethereal forces. So I taunted them, Monty. I danced on the Indian burial ground and I got my just desserts. I was fired as a result. It wasn't because of anything I did, by the way. It was because of the Freeze curse. Let's stay on track here, guys. It was all Freeze's fault, essentially. That's why. And so... Anyway, the show's going to be identical. I just thought I'd open with that. The Freeze curse got me, so I now know how Mithy feels. I now know how Nuke... Well, I already did in many senses, because let's face it, we have similar problems in life, similar kind of things weighing us down. But we're great guys, that's what I'm trying to say. So let's start the show anyway. So the problem... Immediately, I know that any viewer of the show right now is going to be thinking like, well, it'd be unfair to not address Worlds whatsoever, since the last show was actually like... after like the first groups or something, and we never got to like the playoffs and all the stuff that happened there. But at the same time, that shit was like 3 weeks ago, so we can't talk as though this was like the post breakdown of Worlds. So I want to talk about things at Worlds, and we'll reference them a bit so people know our opinions, but we'll try and tie it into the stuff that's happening now with the teams. So actually, why don't we just start and we'll go like top to bottom on the results of Worlds. So let's just start at the very top. Samsung White won Worlds, right? Now, prepare yourself, Monty, okay? You've had these weeks to sort of decompress and process what happened. So try not to act too smug and like, remember when I told you guys, I can't remember. I'm thinking already, Monty, of when you were like, if you remember, I actually predicted all of SK Telecom's dominance in Season 3 because I said after the qualifier, like, they will win Worlds and then asterisk, like, go undefeated in the next season. And then, like, you did say White was going to win Worlds, right? So overall, what was your sense of White winning Worlds? Like, was it, did the way they win, was it as expected?
Well, sure. And not only did I say that, but remember the time on the show where I said that I secretly think that Samsung White is the best team in the world, but they just have a bad matchup versus Blue.
Yeah.
I think that was before the regionals where they stomped SK Telecom.
Before the tiebreaker, I believe, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they did about as expected. I mean, they obviously fell into the old White trap of getting a little bit too cocky in some of their games. I think they could have clean swept Worlds if they had really wanted to. I think that the 2 games that they lost, they picked very similar low wave clear compositions and just kind of got snowballed on early. So they did play pretty high risk, I would say, low reward comps in those scenarios. But otherwise, they had everything well in hand. I mean, their average game time was, at least going into the finals, was below 30 minutes. They were looking extraordinarily dominant. I didn't get to see the stats after Worlds was over. But given what we saw at Worlds, it wouldn't surprise me if that still held true in the finals. I'm glad we at least got 4 games. It made things a lot more exciting than last year. But yeah, White just came in and pretty much rolled everybody. They showed incredible diversity in terms of their champion pools and many different strategies. They busted out a bunch of champions that a lot of people hadn't seen them play before. I had seen Looper play Teleport Topicali in scrims because between scrims with CLG and then the scrims that I saw in the Korean boot camp when I was there observing the teams, I had seen some of the weird stuff that they had been playing, and I hadn't seen, but I had heard that he was playing a little bit of Singed as well. But there were still some surprises, like Samsung Blue's Galio top. That was surprising to me, at least. But yeah, I mean, Samsung White just looked incredible, and they finally kind of got it together and showed what a team of kind of superstar players can do.
Okay, so let me rewind a bit. When you said that part about how they could have clean swept Worlds, I think that's actually an interesting point, because when you look at it, they actually, they really could have just gone 15-0, okay. I think that was the amount you had to get together. Yeah, I think it was 15-0, okay. So they could have gone 15-0, but I actually am glad they didn't, okay. Now that'll sound weird, because you'd think to yourself, wait a minute, surely you're like mad as fuck about the context of people like, but TSM beat them, that sort of thing. I'll give that up, Monty. I'll allow TSM fans to say, like, yeah, we beat the super dominant team. Because here's the thing, if you remember the context, okay, they gave up that game by being so cocky and trying to Uber style on TSM in game 3.
They said that too.
Yeah.
Samsung White said that in post-match interviews, that they got too cocky and pick and ban and then didn't care at level 1. Mata said that in an interview in Korea.
Here's the thing, Monty, with everything that like is taken away from you, sometimes you're given something in the same hand, So I'll give that loss to TSM in exchange for the beautiful game 1 and game 2 in that series. You remember that, Monty? You remember that masterpiece of disrespect? That was lovely. That's my point. I'm making this as people think I'm slamming TSM here. I actually mean that as a real point, though. Even though they didn't go undefeated, I think they didn't go undefeated, but they made it a more interesting tournament as a result. Because rather than just beat people in like the way that you would like them to beat people, Monty, just use like small edges, dominate them, never take a risk, just roll to like 6 kills, take all the towers. That wouldn't be as fun to actually watch just as a spectator as like shitting on people super hard at level 1 with like super late game comps, just doing like invade the jungle all the time. That was incredibly entertaining to watch. Right?
Also, I mean, Crepo and I brought this up in the kind of post-match, but for both me and Crepo, our favorite part of the World Championship was the teleport play, Looper's teleport play in Game 2 versus TSM, where they 3-buffed TSM and then killed 3 of them at Samsung White's blue buff when he teleported after forcing a teleport top. It was such a brilliant piece of on-the-fly strategy and something that we had never really even seen before. So that was really impressive. And Crepo likened it to the crazy tower juggle that SK Telecom did to get like a 13-minute inhibitor at last year's Worlds. And it was very much the standout play. I think the standout moment of this year's Worlds tournament. And I mean, after that, I don't think you can blame White for being cocky. And to TSM's credit, they did snowball that game really well. They played well with the advantage that they had. It's just that, White was just like progressively pushing the envelope, seeing like what they could get away with further and further and further. And then they hit that limit and they just bounced back and won game 4. And I saw the same thing with Starhorn Royal Club too. They just kind of like kept pushing that limit. The first couple games were very dominant, and then they crossed that line again and then brought it back for game 4. So it was a very dominant tournament for them, though. I mean, undoubtedly, just an incredibly strong run at Worlds. Stronger even than SK Telecom's run last year. So impressive stuff for sure.
Well, that's why I reference it, though, because to tie into the point that you said there, it was interesting just as almost sort of like a specimen of what an uber-dominant team that's not only the best, but has nearly all the best players. This is actually one of the few times that's correct. I hate that whole stereotype, Monty. Yeah. They were as close as you could, as in the people who weren't the best were sort of like top 3 at their position, But as a result, if you really did have the good strategy and the good approach and the good synergy and the stars, and then you sort of wanted to prove it, listen, we're really going to style on you and just go as crazy as possible. That's what this tournament was. I actually made a point, I wonder if you agree, that I've in all of League of Legends history, after watching all the big games in history, I've never seen as big a gap between the dominant top team and the other elite teams as that gap there, even when someone like Moscow 5, was just destroying IEM Hanover, CLG could still take them fairly close in a straight up series and have some games that were close. And then even when, Frost were on top in Korea, there'd still be games against Blaze where it went 3-2 in the series. In this tournament, that's why we made the point here that it almost was like Samsung White almost gave up the chance to go undefeated to go even more styling on people and even more disrespect. It's like it wasn't the option of the other teams to make it close. They really were just that far ahead, right? There was a huge gap even from
it was a massive gap.
Do you think the biggest in history relative to their era?
I think the only other one that comes into consideration is SK Telecom's run in Champions Winter, when they did go undefeated. So that could be cited as a pretty major gap as well between them and the rest of the Korean teams.
But even then, that series they had against KT Bullets was reasonably close, whereas no one really gave that sort of no one really had a chance to win a best of 5 against White, right?
Well, yeah, SK Telecom did 3-0 that series, but one of those games in particular was very, very close, and Faker had to hard carry it on Ribbon. But yeah, there really wasn't a series that was close. And I think that you could tell that Samsung White respected Blue a lot more, because that was the one series where they didn't really do anything super weird and pick and ban in the bracket stage. They were just straight up, we need to win this, get it over with, move on to the finals. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it was a very, very decisive 3-0.
So I've got a problem with this, Monty, which is that as a general sports rule, I don't know if I've ever said it on this show before, but I think I might have done, maybe. Okay, it's a concept I always repeat in Counter-Strike, okay? Because in Counter-Strike, that's a game where the contracts aren't as set, and it's actually very easy to break a contract, right? So in theory, if you and me are on the same team and we have a bad tournament where we're expected to win, but we come third, actually, you can just leave and go somewhere else, or I can get someone to replace you very easily. It's not the same as League, where you'd have to wait until the end of the season and the contract runs out and all that sort of stuff. So as a result, in Counter-Strike, people are very trigger happy to actually change rosters and disband and break up. So I always repeat to people that if you have a great team, but you have one or two bad tournaments, but okay, this group has the potential still to get back to being the best. I always repeat, I have a rule, which is that, or principle, which is that you should never break up an all-time great team until you are sure, okay, it actually can't win anymore. If there's a chance that you could fix your internal problems and get back to the top again, it's usually going to be better to keep the lineup together rather than test out a short-term upgrade, but you don't know it'll be as good as the synergy of the group, okay? So along those lines, it seems to hold true in League of Legends. Even if Cloud9 had a period in time where they had a bad couple of weeks, we would all agree, okay, no, stick together, and it hasn't been proven it won't work again. Just wait until the team gets back together and you'll probably win LCSNA again. So on these lines, okay, you never want SK Telecom to break up until what's happened now happens, which is, okay, actually we saw them lose enough times to White and not win OGN again that now you can, okay, now a roster move's justifiable. So my point I'm getting to here is, doesn't it kind of bum you out that White finally reaches their zenith with this lineup with Pawn? They win the World Championship in dominant fashion. There's a part of you thinking, okay, what next? What would happen if they played an OGN season now? Would they go undefeated, But actually, there will never be an answer to that. That chapter is already closed, and it's sort of at the very peak of their level, that part of the story, at least as a team's over, right?
Unfortunately, yes, and it's really sad because this same roster, for the most part, except for Pawn and Dade kind of swapping around, has been together for, with Looper has been together for a year, and then they had Om before that, and I mean the trio of Mata, Imp, and Dandy has just been so stable, and there's a reason why they've reached top three. They finished top three in the last 5 consecutive seasons of Champions. I mean, this is a really solid team. And it has been for nearly 2 years now. So their continued success and their continued strength, it is really sad to see everybody kind of going to China, or we'll see what offers happen. Like, there are too many rumors right now. Who knows what's going to happen. There's still a chance for the other Korean teams to step up and actually start paying people real money. But, that's really the problem with Korea right now, and I think we should get into that a little bit, is how disappointing it is that these multi-billion-dollar companies are not actually offering competitive wages with China, because a lot of people want to talk about how, a lot of people are saying, I've noticed, like, the new format for, league is not good for Korea and blah, 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 blah. And I actually think that it could have been really good if the top teams were willing to pay top dollar. Because if we rewind a little bit and we go back a few years and we look at what was going on in Korea for StarCraft Brood War, we still have a lot of these same teams. We still have Samsung back in Samsung Con. We still have we had KT, we had SKT, these big name teams, CJ, that were paying players legitimately $500,000 a year. That Flash had a $500,000 a year contract on KT. Boxer on SKT famously had a very large contract as well. So these companies used to put a lot of value on these players and were able to pay them very, very well. But that just hasn't happened in League of Legends for some reason. I think because they haven't had to offer as competitive salaries up until now, and they've kind of fallen behind the salary curve. But I mean, Korea, the KESPA and the Korean teams really need to look at this, because that's the main reason behind the loss of talent. And what's unfortunate to me is when KESPA and OGN and Riot Korea announced the new format, and they were going to have, that council, and they said, okay, we're going to pare it down to 1 team per org, but you can have 10 players, and, you can swap players week to week, where if you want to make, a player on your B team who's playing on the more like the under league, you can just swap them up and you can change that roster. So that gives you flexibility as a team, which I think is great. So you can have a very deep bench and like kind of figure out what works week to week. And there's less pressure because it's a league format instead of a tournament format. So each individual game is not necessarily as important. And also the exciting thing about that was that if the Korean scene wasn't hemorrhaging talent right now, the concentration of amazing teams, if you had to like pair, if all the organizations had to like field like just one team and then there were only 8 teams, like every single game in that league would have been amazing, right? Like all the games would have been worth watching. We would have seen a parity probably between teams in the Korean scene, not any more of the kind of like amateur teams getting stomped in Champions that we saw during group stage. Like, it would have been a ridiculously competitive league. And I was very excited about that until, all these players started going to China and NA and Europe. Some of them, it doesn't really matter. Like, Ryu and Horo, I wish them the best on Millennium, but they're not exactly like super top players in their positions. And they can probably be relatively easily replaced by like rising talent, but players like Kakao and Rookie, Dade, Deft, Dandy, Mata, if these guys leave, I mean that's an enormous blow to the talent pool in Korea.
Okay, so let's start in the point. Let's go back to the first point you made about the fact that it's not that there's no precedent in Korean esports, okay, to pay a big salary. Because remember, the story that came out recently was the one that was rumored that Dade had been offered $250,000 a year salary, and people will hear that and be like, "Well, that's above the odds. Like, who could pay that?" But like you're saying, there were periods in Brood War, because actually they used to be, believe it or not, in Brood War they used to just release the salaries. Like I remember on Team Liquid, certain months they would have like a list of everyone's salary or what they were making. Okay, and off the top of my head, I think there was something like at least 10 players, I think, who made about 100,000 or more. Like Like someone who's like the third best on SK Telecom maybe made 90,000, and then like the best on Samsung made like 150,000, and then Flash made like 400,000, and this Bisu made 300,000. Like there was all these figures, and the idea was if you really were a star talent, you could command the big salary for obvious reasons. Because once you get to that level, if you don't pay Bisu this amount, then he will just go to the other team who have their salary. They have a space for a star player, and they'll just offer him 250,000. You know, like it becomes competitive within itself. Let me ask you a question that might sound controversial. I would think that would naturally occur in itself, right? Like, if, for example, if Kakao wins OGN with KT and they aren't going to pay him, let's say, $200,000. We're making the figures up here for anyone listening, okay? Let's say they don't pay him $200,000. To me, the natural market, what do you call it? The natural market value would be that, okay, no problem. What happens is Najin say, hey, well, we're looking for a jungler, so we'll pay you $200,000 to come to our team. If that wasn't happening, is it too much speculation to suggest that maybe within Kesper or within OGN, there was like an element of a cartel issue? Like we're all going to agree, okay, it's not that we're going to screw players, but we're just going to agree, okay, none of us are going to pay a ridiculous amount for a player. We're not going to let the market get inflated. Do you think that could have existed?
I think given the available evidence, it's definitely a question. I don't think it was, if this happened, I mean, it definitely wasn't OGN. They don't have any, say over that. I probably wasn't Kespa. It was probably the teams, if this happened, and I'm not saying that it did, in my mind, it was probably it would have had to have been the teams talking to each other in order to arrange this. And I think that what Kespa's doing right now is really good. Kespa's has said that they want to meet minimum salary requirements that exist in other Korean professional sports. And I did some digging and, I tweeted about some articles out about this. Like in baseball in Korea, minimum pay is 25,000. Average pay is about 90 for Korean professional baseball players. And it's pretty comparable across soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, and basketball in Korea as well. Is that the minimum is about 25. Average for baseball is about 90. Average for soccer is, I think, a little over 100,000. And then obviously the star players are paid a lot more than that.
Okay.
So if they're trending towards that, I think it's really good because that means that even the bench players on these teams, or even like the reserve players, will be getting paid somewhere around 25,000, which is what Riot pays the LCS players as well. So I think that's a good starting point. Obviously, that's still a relatively low amount of money for this kind of popularity and this kind of pressure. But yeah, I think you have to have that question. And at the very least, I think we can say that Kespa should have stepped up sooner. I think that this has all been very reactive to the Korean players leaving the scene, and that they weren't very proactive about making sure that, dealing with these companies in order to make sure that the players had competitive salaries. And I think it's just because they haven't been threatened like this before. There hasn't been another esport really that's been this popular, because StarCraft 2 is really only popular outside of Korea. That where the Korean players had to compete with both a domestic and an international market, because they only had to compete with the domestic market in Brood War, and they only had to compete with the international market in StarCraft 2. And so I think this is a very new situation for these teams. And I do think that this is good because this will spur change, right? It already has. And I think it's great that these minimum salary requirements are getting put in by Kespa. But I do think that there was an element of potentially of these companies not wanting to pay as much, and so potentially colluding in order to keep player salaries low. Or even if they weren't colluding, they didn't see enough of an investment at the very least that they wanted to drive up salaries by taking key players. The other thing that I think is really going to help is Kespa's new requirements about contract length and controlling the contracts like Riot does, where you'll know coming into 2016, like players have to be contracted for a year, and then everybody will know the end dates, and so then the real bidding wars and everything like that can begin. So it's just, I think in Korea there wasn't enough structure to create a really competitive bidding environment for players, for player contracts. And that was also part of it as well. So perhaps there was an element of collusion. I think that's definitely a valid concern to bring up, just because it, based on the market, it doesn't really make sense, especially when you consider the value of the marketing that these teams are getting. Like, for the amount of money Samsung was spending, I don't think they have ever had more bang for their buck in marketing than Samsung White winning Worlds, if you actually think about it.
Sure. So, okay, I'll again, let me set some historical context. So the point you're making there is actually correct, which is part of when we gave the Brood War example before, we have to realize Brood War was a special case in as much as there wasn't any other global market, and they had an awesome domestic market because they had all these huge sponsors within their scene. Now, the unique thing about LoL is that, first of all, you have Chinese esports, which developed a long way since the Brood War days, where they have all these billionaires, as we'll get into now, with some of these transfers, where they can essentially pay what they want because they're just rich enough that it's not even necessarily a business decision. They can just, it's a play thing of like, I want to have the best players on my team, I'll pay for them, okay? So they can pay above the odds there. And then obviously in the West, we have this streaming phenomenon where we've got money coming into Western teams. That didn't exist in StarCraft days, or in fact, even in StarCraft 2, there wasn't quite that level that you can see in League of Legends from the streaming numbers. So here's the problem. Like you're saying, it's not that Korea can't match this. If they wanted to tomorrow, I'm pretty sure Samsung could offer something comparable to that.
They could offer way more.
But here's the thing. Here's my question for you, Monty. Another hypothetical. I get the feeling, okay, I could believe that initially maybe they haven't done it, because even if they heard, okay, right, Kakao's left, they might think, right, well, that's just one player though. Now then, what might change their mind is if they hear, hey, look how much talent's left. Now maybe we have to step it up. But here's my question for you, Monty. Is there an element to which you think, because this is my feeling, that it might take a while before the Korean teams match these high salaries? Because I think that there's a degree to which they might think, okay, how much of these star players is them being star players, and how much is our system, and how much is our recruitment, and maybe we can find the new... Like, remember when Reaper left Blaze, okay, they found Flame. Remember when they moved Woong and they found Shy. They found better players, actually, than already very good players at these positions. I actually think, initially at least, maybe some of these organizations, Samsung, SKT, KT, might initially have a little bit of hubris and think, okay, actually, we make the stars, we find the stars, we polish them. Listen, if Kakao's left, we'll find someone else as good. Do you think they might have some of that hanging around? Do you buy into it, though? Does you agree with it to a degree?
I mean, we have seen... all these players came from somewhere, and we have seen a lot of rising talent in Korea over the past year. And if they're confident enough in their coaching staff to manufacture these stars, then perhaps they could feel that way. I definitely think they could feel that way. Whether I don't really. I do think that there is a lot of talent and dedication in Korea, but I do think that it's dumb to let these very talented star players go at the same time. I think that's too arrogant that you can't count on that. But they may think that. And going back as well, I mean, if we talk about Samsung, and I mean, Samsung is a top Fortune 500 company. They sponsor Chelsea in the Premier League?
Something like that, yeah, I'm sure.
Point is, they sponsor one of the most famous soccer teams in the world. It's not like they have a shortage of money. They're going to be paying these soccer players far more money. But I bet you per dollar spent, in terms of marketing value, that Samsung winning Worlds was way better. Way better. You know what I mean?
Okay. Because here's the thing, I actually agree with that as a principle. The key way I make the distinction is like this. It was very easy to let like Insect leave, for example, because in that scenario, even though he actually had probably the most upside of the B-tier players who left, you knew that there would be players out there where if it's... this is why I always made that point to you, Monty. Even though you always brought up his KDA, the real reason you don't give Insec a spot on any other top team is that if you even have the rumour that you've got a bad rep in Korea, they just say, why don't I just try someone who doesn't have a bad rep? That's their mentality. You know, I can get a player who's almost as good as you mechanically, Insec, but he might listen and he might not have a bad rep. So there's no upside to me if I'm a Korean team. The difference is, even... with Kakao, you can't replace Kakao. There's only two players in the world who are at the level of Kakao. It's Kakao and Dandy, and now both of them have gone. So the problem there is, even if you get a godlike jungler now, you're not going to get two to replace them. And even worse, here's the problem. It actually kind of sucks just from our perspective as like high-level fan or whatever, or someone who is an aficionado of Korean LoL, that even if we found magically Kakao Mark II, we can't see him versus Kakao Mark 1, which is what you'd also want to see, right? Whenever someone's the top player, you want to see him get knocked off by the guy who's the right one challenging for that spot, whereas now you'll only see it at Worlds. Is that a concern for you at all?
Well, yeah, it's lame, obviously. It's not as satisfying as a fan. And also, I think one of the problems is that when all of these players, because we've seen a lot of these Korean players, there are all kinds of roster rumors. Who knows where they're going? But it seems like a lot of these players are kind of going to LSPL teams or like tier 2 Chinese teams. Oh, yeah. And that probably means that some of these guys aren't even going to get into the LPL, right? Or almost certainly means, in fact, a lot of these Korean players are not even going to be, well, LPL is expanding to 12 teams, so maybe they will all get in. But it does make it less likely, right? So we may, and we also don't know, communication is always an issue. I mean, Starhorn Royal Club magically made it into the finals. I think that was a fluke, though, a little bit, that they managed to get there with 3 Chinese players and 2 Korean players. But I think fundamentally, the lack of communication will hurt these teams. And I don't, like, obviously China's going to get a lot stronger by having these players in the scene, but come next year's Worlds, will a mixed roster team be able to win the World Championship over a Korean team with perfect communication? Maybe, but probably not. I think the Korean teams will stay good enough, especially if SK Telecom makes savvy roster moves right now, because it only takes one team to kind of step up right now and start paying the big bucks, and they can create a super team for the next year. And SK Telecom K probably has they're not K anymore, they're just SKT T1 now. But they probably have the best opportunity to build a brand new team around Faker and make a really good stab at things.
So when you mentioned there, what was that there?
Najin could also be really good.
Oh yeah, when you mentioned the Starhorn Royal Club point there, I just want to set some context for people, because I noticed in the final, Double Lift and Crepo kept stressing the fact that they really did have very little communication. Like, I saw that video where Uziai's communication in game was like this: go, 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 go. That was like all he said. Like, he didn't say anything else. He pinged and said go, go, go. Like, that's not communication, right? That's like the most basic level of communication. So that's not what a pro player usually means when they say communication, of like giving information, getting something back, like passing strategy. So when people are going to want to say, Monty, well, don't worry about it. Starhorn Royal Club made it work. They got these players in and did this. That's the exception that proves the rule. It's
mind-boggling that they were able to do that.
Like, that is the outlier to that scenario. But because remember, there were other teams, like World Elite got some Koreans. That was a bad idea, actually. That fucked their whole team, actually. They had a better chance without them. And so I actually think in general that won't work as well. Like, actually, I would hope that when they bring these other players over, like Kakao and these players, I would hope their whole approach is like, okay, we're not going to have super awesome communication. So what we're going to do is we've got Kakao. Now we're literally going to build the team around him. Like, we're going to put a guy here who works with him and that. Because the idea is you're going to have to, with all those teams, because of the communication problem, you're going to need that magical quality Starhorn Royal Club, but from the ground up, which is like, you have to just find synergy that just exists of its own self. You can't build it up like you do in a team. Like, okay, you have to learn how to communicate with me, and I'm going to say this to you. That's not going to exist, right?
Well, that was the brilliance of Starhorn Royal Club too, is that there's all the individuals' players' styles fit so well together. I mean, they just aren't afraid to go in. They're very trusting. They're very just a very all-in team. So their styles just meshed beautifully. Yeah. And that's the reason why they were able to get that far. I think it will help that Kakao and Rookie are going to be on the same team, whatever team that is. Because obviously that mid-jungle synergy is going to be super important. But the other thing to consider, too, is that a discussion around the game is about to change dramatically, right? And so when all of these teams are trying to figure out the optimal way to play the game early on, obviously communication is going to be a lot bigger. Remember when the first wave of Korean players hit China, it was like in the second season of the LPL, when the metagame, based on the changes for Season 4, had already kind of shaped up, and so that it was just a matter of refining that. Yeah. But man, it's going to be a lot different when all of these Season 5 changes hit and everybody's scrambling to figure out how to play the game again, as happens every year. And that's where I think the communication issues are really going to take hold. So I actually don't anticipate, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that all Chinese teams will, at least in the first season, continue to do probably better than even these teams with Korean superstar players on them, just because of that communication issue and because of the fact that with all these changes to the game, that the communication will be more difficult on those other teams. Come the summer season, that may change.
I mean, the Star and Roll Club example is comparable to some of the ones we always give as the example. Like the best one's Gambit. Gambit clearly didn't have great communication. They didn't have like a very conscious strategy. They just had a really great synergy. Like if you were making one of those like top trump sets of cards, their synergy rating would be like 10 out of 10. Whereas some of the other factors would be lower. The difference is, compare like a Gambit or a Cloud9 where the lineup itself has some special quality to it. Go across the board, and I think what's happening with some of these teams they're trying to make in China would be more comparable to like Alliance or the TSM lineup that they had earlier this year, where on paper you've got all these great players, you've got a whole bunch of mechanical players, and you chuck them all together and you're like, this should be really good, but there's always something a little bit missing, or there's one player here who's really good and another player here, but there's something doesn't quite connect between the two. I mean, is this kind of how you see it going when you initially bring them into China?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the Chinese just wanting the shiny toys to play with, and if they can get good stream viewership because of the Korean players' fame, rather, then that's going to be a bonus as well. Because the thing about China that's happening right now is there are all these competing stream services. It's not like NA where Twitch is like super dominant and the other ones are trying to catch up. Right now, there's just a huge bidding war going on between all these various streamers and streaming platforms. And so that's like driving up player salaries and stuff as well. So I think a lot of these teams are able to afford more, or at least offer the players better streaming contracts in order to bring them over. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, you see a lot of like the OMG players have like streaming. All the teams have like streaming platforms in their names on LPL, and they've got the logos on their shirts and everything like that. And obviously, these players can't stream as much as Chow Mei in that article that was translated by On Gamers recently, which is very interesting about Chow Mei's payment in the Chinese scene. But yeah, I mean, the streaming contracts may continue to grow for the professional players as well, and that's going to be a very attractive and lucrative option. And that's another thing that Korea fell very far behind on, was that they didn't bother to stream.
I see the very subtle needle you put in there. So people getting really high salaries on Gamers article. Okay, I see where you go with this. No, anyway, whatever. So actually, a question I had for you is this. With that whole thing about the story that you're mentioning, where Chow Mei is making $800,000 a year, and there was also a story recently that we never got the full details on, where apparently as soon as Wei Zhao retired, because he's the biggest name, he got like offered some multi-million-dollar contract. I think I would assume it's for multiple years, since they listed Chow Mei as the big one. Okay, so in this sort of world, I think actually there's a real concern that I want to ask you about, which we used to speculate would happen in the West, but it never really did, which was in the West. People actually used to say during Season 2, like, why does the Odd One even keep playing? Because he knows he's not going to be the best jungler in the world, but if he just goes and streams, he probably can be the number one streamer in the world. He could make a lot of more money in terms of, he'd have a lot more fun, he'd make a lot more money, and he'd have a lot more time to do the streaming, than having to practice really hard for like this LAN and then another LAN and another LAN. Now at the time, I think there was a degree to which, okay, maybe you could make a lot more money, but it wouldn't be significantly more than you could win at the LANs and stuff, so that could balance it. Secondly, if he was still quite good at the time, he was still close to his peak of his powers, okay, maybe also it's more fun and more satisfying to like have a goal, like I want to win something, as opposed to just wake up every day and stream. These all make sense. Do you worry at all that if the streaming success gets out of whack with how much you can make and how hard a life it is to become the best pro as an Asian pro gamer, that we might lose some of the talent just to the streaming world, and we won't have like for example, he hasn't done it, but let's say Dandy just decided, like, you know what, it's really, really hard to be the best jungler and to win worlds. Like, that took me 2 years of my life and I had to work every day. Why don't I just be a streamer now and I'll just quit, even though I might have had a third run in me, Are you worried about that at all?
Sure. I mean, that is definitely a concern right now. But here's what I think is going to happen. Okay, so if we look at streaming revenue and we talk about that, so the streaming revenue is a direct result of the if you guys don't know, the way it works is that internet ads you get a certain payment called CPM, which stands for cost per mil, which means that you get, say, $4 per 1,000 people that see your advertisement, right? So the thing is in esports right now and streaming is that the numbers are there, right, guys? Like, the numbers are there. You'll see, like, I don't even know what Worlds was this year, but I'm sure it was huge, even bigger than last year. And like the numbers are going to be crazy when they release them. And the streaming viewership is definitely there. Hundreds of thousands of people watch these streams. It's possible for one person to get, 60 to 100,000 by themselves on Twitch on a good day. If you're a very popular streamer, nothing else is going on.
But Jurgensen,
that's right. So the numbers are there, but the thing is the numbers are only being reflected in the advertisement revenue that's being played through commercial ads right now. Now that is not. It's because the sponsorship has not actually caught up to those numbers yet, right? The non-endemic sponsors, the Verizons, the AT&Ts, the Vodafones, whatever continent you're on, you want to talk about. These companies have not gotten involved yet in a major, major way. Now, I think that next year we're going to see a lot more of these non-endemic sponsors start to play ball, especially because like the earth has been shaken by this Amazon buying Twitch for $1 billion deal, and it's making like articles. I mean, esports got a front page article above the fold in the Sunday New York Times like a few weeks ago, and they've continually kept up with esports coverage in major articles in the business section. Wall Street Journal ran that big article about the acquisition. So I think next year a lot of these non-endemic sponsors are going to come into play, and there will be a change where eventually the sponsorship deals will cause the professional players' salaries to outstrip what streamers can make. That's going to be the natural course of events. It's just we're at a really weird point in history in esports where viewership is extraordinarily high, but the sponsors haven't actually like put down the good money for those numbers yet. They will soon, I'm pretty sure. So I think that is a concern right now, but I don't think it's going to be a concern within the next year or two.
Okay, that makes sense. So another team I want to talk about, from Worlds going forwards, because it ties into that thing about Starhorn Royal Club, and another weird example of synergy was in OMG, this bizarre scenario where, here's another scenario, Monty, of where this shouldn't work, When you add a substitute player who hasn't played for weeks and weeks, you should definitely get worse when you add him in. You might get better in one game if it's a real surprise fight, but you should be worse overall because you haven't practiced with him. So this Cloud guy, there was something weird about their synergy when they had the Cloud guy in the lineup, right?
Yep.
I mean, supposedly some of the players didn't even like him or something ridiculous like that, right?
Well, I mean, the rumor is he was benched for having a bad attitude. Wow. But he performed exceptionally well against Dodge and White Shield, even though White Shield did make it very easy by continuing to give him Janna throughout the entire series.
See, the problem there, Monty, was he was benched for having a bad attitude. He performed especially well.
Okay.
Keep going. Yeah, his Janna was very good. It's true.
His Janna was very good.
Fresh, pretty nice.
Yeah, obviously he didn't come through in the series against Starhorn Royal Club, and yeah, he looked a little tilty in that series. Can't be 100% sure, but just watching his play towards the end, he definitely wasn't playing up at that same standard anymore. But yeah, part of it too was that Dada is just, I mean, he did not have a good performance at Worlds. So I think that it wasn't too hard to look better than Dada 777. And also they played a ton of games with Cloud anyway. So it's not like there was zero synergy built up. They played the majority of the LPL season with him.
Okay, so here's the thing. When you said that example of like, that the rumor, which everyone's heard, is that he had a bad attitude. That was why he was benched, and because obviously in the game he was a very good player. The fact that it's the timing of when they brought him back was made it hilarious and amusing to me, Monty, because it's like they thought, like, listen, you're benched, your attitude's bad. Listen, we can do it without you. Oh shit, we barely got through. Jesus, we're done here, right? Could you come back in the lineup? And he was sort of like, oh, I see. And he was like, he hadn't been reformed whatsoever. He was just Monty. He was sort of like that guy who's like he's sort of like when they had to, in the movie The Rock. Like, if they wanted to break back into Alcatraz, they had to get the one man who'd escaped from Alcatraz. It was that sort of scenario. They were like, listen, you're not reformed, but you're a bad motherfucker. We need you in this team, Like, I imagine that's sort of what it was like, and they brought him back in. And I get the sense... Except
the reversal is that in that movie, they needed to get in there to disarm the toxic gas that they were going to shoot at San Francisco. But in actuality, he was the toxic gas.
Yeah. But he killed other Chinese people first, so that was all right. No, it was actually Najim White's shield. He killed, yeah, that's right. He killed Koreans first. Okay. So, Oh, I actually have a question before we go on. We haven't addressed, really, we just tangentially addressed it, the fact that OGN has switched to this one-team system, okay? Now, you're going to think to yourself, obviously I'm going to have a critical opinion of this, Monty, because I loved, like, the Blaze Frost setup, the Shield Sword setup, the Blue-White. You can see over history how it's been beneficial to have the two teams, and also how eventually, when the right mixture happens, even the B team, as a lot of these teams started out as, can overtake the A team. That can actually happen, and it changes up the whole scene. In general, what were your initial thoughts of, like, the change away? I mean, there must have been some critical element where you thought, like, if it's possible, I'd rather it doesn't happen, right? Or I liked the way it was before, even if it had problems.
I think the decision between Riot, Kespa, and OGN, I actually am, like I said earlier, I think that the idea to go down to 8 teams from 16 teams and yet allow, like, the teams to compete in 2 leagues simultaneously and be able to hot swap players week to week depending on performance could have created a much stronger scene, right? Because all of a sudden these teams are kind of forced to field an A team, and I think that in some ways the Korean scene was held back because the teams would kind of, like, split their good players between 2 teams, and then, like, Blaze and Frost had a chance to make a super team in Champion Summer last year and just, like, didn't do it.
Sure.
And that was a big point of, like, criticism and speculation. And now they were going to kind of be forced to do it. So it was exciting, right? And like I said, I think that by concentrating the 2 teams together, it would have created an incredibly competitive league where you had these 8 teams. And like I said earlier, every game was going to be worth watching. Because if none of the players had left, or let's say, like, a lot of these star players from Samsung Blue had then distributed themselves and kind of, like, filled in all the cracks on all the other teams after the season, it would have been an insanely good tournament, right? Just, like, ridiculously entertaining. Now, instead, they decided to go to China and join what ostensibly are LSPL teams, even though we haven't had a lot of announcements about which teams these actually are yet, just rumors. So that in and of itself is bad, and I think that's the bad part of this, is that the teams, the scene has not retained the talent by paying aggressively paying salaries and creating these opportunities. So I think that the 2-team system, well, this probably would have happened regardless, and so actually I think it's a better thing, because at the very least right now the talent will be concentrated among the 8 teams. Can you imagine what would have happened if each org still had 2 teams and then all the players left? Like, I think it would have been even worse.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Here we go. I've got a way to frame this, Monty, because I've actually here's my analysis of the situation. The big problem, okay, was that when this announcement was made, because if you're just a fan of Korean League of Legends and you like the history of it, like I mentioned, Blaze and Frost and all this, initially it's a bad thing if you're a fan, because you're like, oh, that's the system I liked and I like the good sides of it. And so initially people just rushed, like, well, who do we blame? And so the obvious person to blame is Riot, right? Because you blame Riot for everything. Like, he died in the game, like, with the fucking Riot. Like every Riot always gets the blame. But here's the thing, Monty. All the stories stressed the fact that, no, Kespa made this decision, or maybe teams within Kespa wanted the move made. Maybe one team stressed it more than another. It was always presented as like, oh, no, listen, Riot didn't do any of this. Riot had nothing to do with it. It just so happens that the teams did it. So here's a Thorin level analogy for you, Monty. We're going to start the show off with a bang again when we bring it back. It's going to be controversial. I'm making it up now. So here we go, Monty, okay. I actually believe this story. I don't think Riot said, you have to do this change. I don't think Riot even came to Casper and said, you must do this change.
They didn't.
But here's the analogy, Monty. So what happened was, there was a girl who started dating this guy, and he has a bit of a past, okay? Listen, he's not a wife beater or anything, but sometimes, you know, arguments happen. He loses his temper a bit. He's very controlling, okay? He's been known to lash out, but he's reformed now. We think he's better, okay? So this girl, she has quite, like, low self-esteem. You know, she used to have an old boyfriend who was really awesome, but then Blizzard killed it. He just went away for some reason, and so she's sort of looking for something stable in her life. And this guy seems like he's got a good job, and he comes from a good family, and he could be really good if they could just get a good connection going. You see where I'm going here, Matty? So anyway, this girl gets with this guy, and when she hears about his past, and she's trying to form this really like strong connection, she hears that like he doesn't really like it when like his girl's out and like other men are looking at her, and like she's like fraternizing with other men. So he never tells her, listen, you do that and I'll beat you up, or like I'll be very strict with you. But what happens is she starts dating him, and then she just announces one day, apropos of nothing, she says, you know what, I'm going to cancel that salsa class that I go to, just because, you know, I love you so much. That's what I think. So essentially, Marty, I think that's my analogy for why Kesper switched to a one-team system. And Riot is absolutely not to blame for anything. That's just, I'm just going to put that out there. There you go. That's the first Thorin analogy of the new Sony Insight. What do you think?
I think it's possible. It's also OGN was in on all these talks, just to like clear everything up. It wasn't a unilateral decision. It was Riot Korea, which is pretty independent of Riot HQ. OGN and Kespa all working on this. I think it's possible that may have happened, but I don't think Kespa would have done anything that the teams themselves were rebelling against, just because, I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar corporations, and Kespa needs them to continue to operate. So obviously the teams had some input there as well, and perhaps the teams also were in favor of this. It's a very interesting situation. It's very hard to tell from the outside what exactly went on. But like I said, I'm not too upset with the decisions that were made surrounding the league. In fact, like, I think it could be very exciting. It could still be very exciting, depending on how many of these players that are rumored to leave Korea actually end up leaving Korea. Because the other thing that people haven't mentioned is there was that article that was written by Mike Huff from Inven, about like these agents basically going around and contacting Korean players, and then trying to get cuts when they negotiated with the teams. And so if they couldn't get a good cut, they would just drop the deal or whatever. They promised things to the players they couldn't deliver. So it's really hard to say if any of these existing Korean players are currently getting scammed or something like that. It's possible. And so how many of these guys will, when everything is said and done, how many of them will actually go to foreign teams? Who knows? They may change their mind. One of the Korean teams may step up and offer a lot of money to be on an existing team. So we'll see. Like I said, we'll see how it shakes out. And also, there's enough rising talent in Korea, or talent that was kind of too far dispersed, that I think it'll still be the most competitive scene, just maybe not at the same level it was the last 2 years. So for me, it's like I said, I keep saying it over and over again. It's not the changes that were made to the format. I think those are potentially very good. It's that, and I like the minimum salary, and I like what the ideas that Kespa, OGN, and Riot are trying to push through here. It's the problem with the player payment that is causing this mass exodus and this hemorrhaging of talent in Korea. If anything, what should be happening is that these massive Korean companies should be the ones who are attracting foreign talent to Korea, if possible, right? There should be. That's how it happened in the early days of League of Legends, when all these Chinese and North American and European teams used to play in Champions. Like, that's the way it should be with the infrastructure in Korea. They should be the ones getting the good foreign players, in my mind.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so if we talked about White a bit, I actually thought of something else. I tweeted this the other day, Monty. People won't believe this. I'm actually an eternal optimist, you know. I seem like maybe I'm a critical guy, glass half empty sort of guy. It's not true at all. I'm just a disappointed optimist that things aren't as good as they could be, okay? So I always try to find a way to frame things in a positive light. So I was looking...
You say disappointed. You're an angry optimist.
Well, anger follows from disappointment. You get resentful. It builds up over time. You have frustrations. I'm like that guy dating Kesper. So anyway, what I'm saying is, I actually thought to myself, well, listen, this is terrible news. Samsung White, maybe the greatest team of all time for all we know. Incredible tournament. If they'd have had more, maybe they could have grabbed that title from SK Telecom. They have all these amazing
certainly
players.
the most consistent team of all time.
Sure. They had Dandy. They've lost him, perhaps. The Imp is resting at the moment. Mata has retired.
No. Mata is resting as well.
Okay,
I think Mata's just...
but technically, he's left the team. Dade apparently is going to leave and go to China. So, okay, 4 out of the... Well, actually, Dade was on blue, so forget that part. But Porn apparently might go to China. So 4 out of the 5 players are gone, Monty. You'd think to yourself, glass half empty, like 4 of the 5 players are gone. That's such a tragedy. I found a bright spot, Monty. Wonderful Looper. I know you love him. You think he's awesome. You guys who are all throwing roses at Looper's feet. Oh, you're the best top laner ever, man. How do you do it? You can play 17. You can play 17 different champions at once. It's almost like no one target bans you, and you have all those all-stars in your team that can't get... I mean, you're the best ever, man. So this amazing player, right? Finally, they're going to take the chains off him, Monty. Instead of him having to drag those best players ever to championships, now we're going to unleash Looper. We're going to see what Looper's capable of with a bunch of newer players that are inexperienced, and he can really carry the game and we'll see what happens when that teleport goes away and it's back to being a flash and an ignite, and then we'll see the power of Looper against someone like, I don't know, let's say a Shy or a Flame or a Sid, those inferior players who couldn't handle the new meta. I can't wait to see this, and I really hope Looper stays and he becomes the new figurehead and he becomes the new carry of White, and that he has a long career where he's going to play with these new teammates against the players I mentioned and convincingly shows just how good he is. Monty, what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I think Looper is very much overrated right now. He's a
very good player, clearly. Yeah.
He had a fantastic tournament at Worlds, and we'll see if he can sustain that in the future with different teammates. He did play legitimately really, really well at Worlds. So you can't take that away from him.
No, but there was people who tried to frame it as like he's the best top laner, or he's the faker of top laners, and it's no. It's not just that Faker was the best. He was also kind of doing some other things there as well,
Yeah, and Looper is a good player, and he did have a really good tournament. He played very well throughout Worlds.
Sure.
But whether that's a sustainable level of play for him, especially like you're saying, when you eliminate, arguably the best jungler in the world, like the best support player in the world, and probably a top 3 mid laner from his team, what happens then?
I mean, you take away 2 amazing vision players, you take away the shot caller, take away playmaking mid, you take away super aggressive bot lane who draws attention all the time because they're super pushing up. Like, it's not that it's a bad player, but here's the fairest way to put it, Monty.
He has been playing on easy mode.
With the resources Looper had, he did the absolute best you could possibly do. That's very impressive. But he had the most resources of any player in top lane, I think, in the history of the game. No one had more advantages and more resources than anyone. Every other guy that we'd put in our all-time great list, usually they were the star and they had a lot of problems, like they had a bad jungler or they had a bad AD carrier. They all had some he had no disadvantage. He was like, listen, here's the example, okay? He's like the guy who really is like one of the best students in the school, but he does come from the rich family that had a tutor, and like he was born in 2 different countries and speaks the language naturally. He had every advantage going for him, He's not like the guy who like was self-built and then got to that level and slightly farther ahead, on his own merits. Like, I think that's a fair way to put it, because I'm not a hater of him. I don't think he's like trash and like he shouldn't even be compared. Like, no, I think you just have to put everyone in the fair context,
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll see how Looper does going forward. Certainly, he'll still be a solid player. As will he have like a 50+ KDA like he did in some of the series in the playoffs? Probably not.
So,
and speaking of KDA, I actually want to talk about SK Telecom a bit, because this ties into Samsung Blue. It's because like a lot of players are, what if Deft goes to SK Telecom, and sure, that'd be good, but from my perspective, like what needs to be done with SK Telecom right now is that they just need to build a team of super solid players around Faker, right? They need to just get very, very stable players. And the problem with Piglet and Mondu at the end was that they had a very weak laning phase. And even at Worlds last year when they won, we routinely saw Piglet and Mondu losing lane. And this is going to be a problem if they get Deft as well. And while Deft is, more of that kind of positional AD carry, and Piglet was much more of a playmaker, I honestly think that moving Bang and Wolf to SK Telecom might be the best move for them, because Bang and Wolf are insanely consistent. Even like on SK Telecom S, Bang would regularly like be at the top of the KDA rankings, even though S was obviously not the best team ever. And so having a high KDA and a team that doesn't have a very high win record, even though it was over 50% most of the time, is really, really meaningful. And he's just very stable in lane, very positionally stable in team fights, does his job, doesn't make the flashy plays, outputs the damage, doesn't die. Like, I actually think that if you're trying to build a team around Faker, it may be better to go for Wolf and Bang on that team. And Wolf's a very good support player as well. So I would kind of like to see that personally. And then maybe them switch out the jungler for somebody who is a bit more playmaky so he can synergize with Faker. Somebody like Swift would be, I think, a good choice there.
So I actually think that SK Telecom, with hindsight of now, made a big mistake with the roster moves they made, because they did it from the old world thinking of like, okay, there's an OGN season, and for an OGN spot you need to keep the 3/5, and so we have to kick 2 players, but there's no point kicking like Pumandu and Bengi, because then we'd have to make a new synergy for the bot lane. And that was the whole reasoning given in theory as to why they kicked the bot lane and they kept Bengi, even though Bengi clearly had a very bad... Here's the thing, based on the new system, knowing what we know now, you probably didn't actually need the 3/5 thing, and you could combine the 2 teams.
Yep.
They probably should have just kept Piglet and kicked Bengi, right?
I don't know. Like, Piglet was falling off as well, I feel. I think it's hard to tell how much he was suffering from being paired with Mondu. But Piglet definitely wasn't his old self either. And I don't know what kind of relationship he had with the coaching staff there. I don't think it was very good. He's mentioned that several times, that he found it hard sometimes working with their coaching staff. So I don't know. I think it's hard to tell. Also, when they made that roster change, that was before the league system was set up. And Kespa has said, with the new change to the league, the teams that will be invited, the 7 teams, it's obviously the 7 Kespa teams that are going to be there. And so therefore, because it's a new system and they're inviting these teams like based on like past history and champions, obviously SK Telecom is going to be in there. So now they can do whatever the hell they want to their roster because they know they're guaranteed a spot anyway. So they can theoretically make a lot more changes right now without any fear.
Okay. So as a tangential topic then, I brought up Piglet. Piglet has gone to Curse. He's joined Curse as the AD carry, which now pairs him with Xpecial, who we're a big fan of obviously on the show. We've highly touted him every time we've talked about him pretty much. I know there's actually a really bad trend in inter-regional moves where everyone who thinks that a region is better wants to make out like a really extreme shift, so that you remember the famous examples were I remember when the EG players moved to NA, and people actually wanted to suggest that like Yellow Pete would be like a really good AD carry in NA or whatever. And I was like, you've gone too far there. Even if you think EU's better, man, you can't go, that's ridiculous, like he's still going to be average at best, isn't he? Like, and he actually turned out to be like a bit below average. So people will want to say, okay, even if Piglet's not at his old level, he's going to come right into NA and he's going to be one of the absolute best already. And pair him with Xpecial, who, listen, in my opinion, the best support in NA, you're going to have the best bot lane automatically. I can see some logic there, some merit to it. Would you buy it at the moment?
Sure. I think it depends. Obviously, Piglet said that, first off, knowing Piglet, I can tell you his English is really bad. He doesn't speak any English, basically. And so that's going to be pretty hard for him. The thing about Piglet, though, is he's a workhorse. He's always had a reputation for practicing an insane amount, and he is very driven. And he's a fun guy too. I don't think he's a pain to be around or, particularly stubborn or anything like that. He's definitely got a sense of humor. So I think that he will be able to do well. How long that synergy takes to develop might be interesting. Like I said, his English is not good.
That has pros and cons to it, though, Monty. Because on one hand, okay, you're going to think initially, like when those Korean players went to Star and Royal Club, you think to yourself, well, that's a negative because now they can't communicate very well. So initially, I would think that's a problem, right? Because when you want to build that bot lane synergy, you need to get to know like even the personality of your support. So here's the thing, right? When Xpecial is sort of talking to Piglet, and he's like, as Xpecial, like a normal guy trying to make him feel welcome, he's going to be saying those sort of passive-aggressive comments that he does, like, that's his personality. And then Piglet's not really going to be getting him, so he's not going to be getting Xpecial as a person. But just like Starhorn Royal Club, you remember the positive thing was, because Uzi Eye and Insect can't really communicate, they also can't have like a really negative relationship. Like it gets limited. So in the same way, there's a glass half full here, Monty. What'll happen is, Xpecial will say like, yeah, great job, man. He just died in the lane. And Piglet will be like, oh, thanks. He's a very encouraging guy. Like, I feel like we've got to finally, we've got the right AD carry for Xpecial here, Monty. We've solved the problem. The Rubik's Cube of Xpecial. The Gordian knot has been sliced.
Yeah, I think they'll do pretty well. Probably people are going to overrate that situation just a little bit, but that's kind of to be expected. I think he'll do decently. As for the other transfers, I mean, you mentioned like Horo and Ryu. Horo's English is actually not bad, so that's going to be a lot easier. Ryu's is terrible. Okay. But with Horo and Ryu together on Millennium, hopefully that'll shape things up. And the thing about Horo and Ryu is that, they're not the best players out there, but they are very consistent. They are very stable players. And so I think that's a pretty good move from Millennium on the whole, as long as those two guys can continue to improve their English as well. Do we have any other Korean players who are coming over to NA or EU?
Macnoon, expansion tournament, Fusion.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how that's going to go for them.
See, that's a hard team there, Monty, because on one hand, I like Macnoon, I'd like him to succeed, but then there's the rest of the players on that team,
Well, Macnoon is not the easiest. When I look at that team, I see a lot of players that have a reputation of not being very easy to work with. Macnoon definitely has that reputation in Korea. That he's a difficult teammate to have. He gets very fired up.
Let's put it this way. Here's just some context for people, Monty. The best team Macnoon was ever a part of was literally hand-built to fit his style because he didn't fit the old team he was in, which itself was like one of the best in Korea. That used to be the second best team in Korea below like Frost. And then it didn't really work with Macnoon, even though they were awesome. So they made him a whole brand new team built around him, where the joke was, like you said, that like Watch was literally like his third summoner spell or whatever. If Nintendo X thinks that he's just going to turn up and Macnoon's just going to play that guy, and sometimes I'll synergize him, that I don't know that that's going to be the case. You probably have to really put effort into those synergies, right, in a Macnoon team.
Well, right, and that's when, obviously for CLG, when we were looking at top laners, that was an option that we were discussing, and I didn't want to go that way because I was so concerned that the team was going to have to fundamentally shift identity to an extreme degree in order to fit Macnoon's playstyle. So I was leery of that. Now having an entirely new team, you have more of an opportunity to build that synergy from the ground up, obviously.
Plus, to be fair to you, you actually knew that this Seraph guy you were going to bring in would totally work out, and like the team would get transformed to a new level and then a new era, and then you actually won that LCSNA split. It's a great time.
Thanks. The thing about Seraph, and I can talk about this a little bit more now, but if I had basically, if I were to go back,
what didn't you know at the time? Do you think that you know now?
I didn't realize Seraph was going to be so emotional in competitive matches. That's what I didn't know and couldn't have known, and neither could his coaches on Najin that I talked to, because he only played in one professional game. I didn't realize how emotional Seraph would get and how nervous he would get, especially, and I think that really affected his performance. But if I were to go back in time with the information that I had, because it's like, he was training with me for several days. His English was good. I knew he was motivated to get much better, and now his English is very good. And I knew how hard he was practicing. I had talked to his coaches on Najin. I got good reviews from them. He worked well with me. We streamed all of the sessions that I had with him privately to the rest of the team members on CLG. We were looking at other players at the time, and it wasn't just like I made that decision. It was multiple people. And he looked like a good young prospect. And indeed, he still may be if he can, I hope that whoever takes him next has some experience in sports psychology. And to our discredit, we should have made that resource more like available to him earlier on once we realized this was a problem. But I think he has a very high skill ceiling. I think that his issue is that he has nerves, and that was getting better, I think, as time went on. But it definitely affected it. But given the information I had at the time, I would make that same decision again in a heartbeat with the options that we had available. Also, we had a very short timeline to make that decision and not a lot of good options. We had good options, just not a very obvious option because Zoro didn't want to be on the team at the time. So that's my feeling about Seraph. I do think he's very, very talented fundamentally. It's just that I think he gets too nervous.
Okay, Monty, if we're going to open if we're going to open Pandora's box of we're going to open Hotshot GG's box, okay? There was about 1 million episodes where you were like, I'd love to talk about the picks on this, but we've got a game next week. There's no CLG games left, Monty. Can you tell us anything in general about were there like strategical aspects to CLG that you tried to implement, or maybe it was the wrong approach yourself? Maybe you had the wrong idea for how you envisioned the team playing that was something to do with why the team didn't go so well in the end? Is there anything like that you could touch on?
I think by the time that the team got to Korea, there were too many interpersonal conflicts to solve, and those interpersonal conflicts affected our ability to strategize efficiently. There were definitely strategies. It's a conversation with the team when you're coaching them. And so it's not like I had unilateral control over our strategies, because obviously it's about how, if the players are comfortable with certain champions, if the players are comfortable with certain strategies, I'm very concerned about that because they have to have that confidence going into a match. And so I definitely suggested things that I think were good that were not used. Okay,
when you say that, let me just back up on that a second. A lot of people will misunderstand how like maybe coaching works, etc. Because actually, if you look at real sports, okay, part of the way the real sports hierarchy works is like, let's say I get hired as the Los Angeles Lakers coach, okay, because the expectation is like to win the NBA championship. Actually, it's possible I could be fired even if I do a very good job, and even if everyone admits I do a good job, I don't meet that goal, okay? So as a result, because the pressure is so high, I'm actually allowed to be quite a strict disciplinarian, because essentially my fucking career is on the line if these guys don't do what I say, So actually, some coaches in real sports can be like total control freaks. It's actually allowed within the job. Like, they can say, listen, I want you to do exactly this strategy, and even if you have a different idea, you have to do what I say now because I'm the coach, okay? Like, that's to some degree accepted. Within League of Legends, I think a lot of coaches are actually closer to the analyst guy, where they're suggesting things and it's up to the player to carry it from that point to the game, Like, actually, the player sometimes, maybe in certain positions, like maybe Locodoc and TSM has some extra gravitas that some other coaches don't have. But I get the sense that some of the coaches, they're more trying to persuade the player, like, listen, I think this is what you should do here. But sometimes the player doesn't do it, like, or he says he's going to do it, and in the game he changes his mind. It sounds like, was this some kind of an issue in CLG? Like, sometimes an idea was carried through. Like I'm getting a sense, and this is not due to anything I know in the background. If I had to guess, I'd say that there were times in CLG where people did what was decided on as like the plan, but then if that started to go wrong at a future time, maybe they just abandoned it. Like, okay, actually, we're not going to do that. That's not the approach we're going to go with, or I don't buy into it anymore, or anything like that.
I think that the poor personal relationships between the players made them very unwilling to follow through with strategies that didn't work immediately, that required more time, because they got frustrated with each other and then would refuse to follow up and continue to practice those strategies, even if they had very high amount, like even if they looked like they would work with more practice. And I think that was the frustrating thing about them being in Korea, especially for me. But it was kind of, just too far gone at that point. I wasn't there living with them. Kelby's, I think, transition over to his new job left. It created a situation where they had less support than they had previously, which was problematic because, like I said, I wasn't there. and then it was kind of all on Matt, and it's more work than that one person can really have. And we were introducing a new analyst into the house at the time. It was kind of just bad timing with a lot of these changes, and the fact that we didn't have an in-house coach. And by the time that this year's playoffs for Worlds ended up with a lot of the other teams stepping up and having in-house coaches, I think that was a mistake, and that we should have made a transition away from me sooner. So there were a lot of factors at play. It's really hard. It's not really. It's kind of a perfect storm. I don't think it was everybody's fault a little bit, but nobody's fault entirely.
Okay. Earlier in the split, when there'd been the good results, like tied for the first place and stuff, I've always mentioned this when the whole drama about you being the coach and the problems happened. I mentioned that there's a degree to which at least I could see, like elements of like, okay, your philosophy on how like, well, the joke of like rotations and objective control was clearly, there was some of that infused in how the wins were happening, okay? And even in some of the losses, you could see what the team was trying to do. At the end of the CLG period coming into now, where you weren't the coach anymore and they went into the expansion tournament, it seemed like not only had they lost all these series, they lost to Curse and then they lost to Dig and then they had to fight against Curse Academy and they almost went out. They literally reverted. So like all of that disappeared, it seemed, and they eventually went back to the joke of like, oh, it's just protect the doublelifting, and that's all they did to get back in the tournament. CLG, that group, if you look back now, would it have actually been possible to consistently do the approach you thought? Like it sounds like sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, even in the good times. Was that the right approach for that group, do you think?
I think if I had been in the house, it would have been, but I think it was hard because I wasn't there.
Okay. If I had to make you speculate now, this isn't you as a coach anymore, but just knowing what you know about the players, we don't know what the lineup is right now for CLG, but imagining the same players are on the lineup to some degree, is it the case that the CLG as it was composed in your day, those sorts of roles could still be filled? Like, can Doublelift be the main carry as he is? Can Link be a carry mid laner? Can Link be the shot caller still? Knowing what you know just from your insights in the team, do you think some of these roles should change if I make you go to an analyst now informed by that?
I don't think Link will ever be a carry mid laner. I think that Link shines the most when he's able to kind of sit back and play the utility role, and he's very smart and talk about, focus more on shot calling and play more conservative champions in the mid lane. I think that if they do retain Seraph, they need to be more open to him playing some of his carry top laners and playing more of that style, and getting a jungler who is more top lane focused in that regard, and just letting Afro and Double kind of fend for themselves. Obviously, the Scar released that vlog. Oh God, good luck to Scar on the team and everything like that. Yes, I had a moment of frustration when he was talking about, CLG doesn't have a schedule. I'm like, Well, Scar, let me tell you, I tried to have a schedule. I tried. I had a Google Calendar. I tried to enforce bedtime. I tried to enforce wake-up time. I tried to enforce gym time. Players didn't want that, and they didn't do it. So even when I was here in Korea, it was like pulling teeth to get them to go to sleep when I told them to, stuff like that. So, it's not like I didn't have a schedule, buddy. It's not like you're the first person to invent a calendar or think that that's a good idea for a team. I just found it totally unenforceable. So I hope that there's more motivation now on CLG to actually commit to a schedule like that, because I think it's really important. And, good luck, seriously good luck to Scar. Like, I think I don't know what kind of job he's going to do. I hope he does a great job with the team. I love CLG. I really like all the players individually. I think it was just a really bad atmosphere by the end, and everybody lost motivation, and therefore it was very difficult to convince them to do anything at all, even go to bed. So if the atmosphere in the team changes, I know Scar is a very positive personality and a very positive influence, then hopefully that will happen. But anyway, I'm just venting because I was frustrated that he said there wasn't anything like that. It's definitely that.
Okay.
So the other thing is that Scar said that they were having tryouts for mid and jungle, and that Link would be doing that. There have been rumors that Link is going to be going into the jungle position. I don't think role swapping is a good idea. That was the thing that didn't happen while I was on CLG. It's very rare when I think that's going to be a good plan. So, yeah, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't don't even think they know what they're going to do right now.
I mean, even though, listen, in Link's case, it's not a classic CLG role swap, because it's true. Link actually is quite famous for being someone who plays more than one role in solo queue. That's actually been something he's always told me was his philosophy.
He also played jungle in LCS when we had to sub in Hotshot before Dexter got here, and he did well.
Okay, so it's not 100%, but I actually agree with you. I always find it risky to do those sorts of role swaps because here's the problem: you're not really. That everyone goes from a weird perspective where they think like, right, we'll start at nothing. Okay, well, he's got something more than nothing because he's played some jungle and that's quite good. No, what you're trying to judge him against is who could you get instead. So if you could get Crumbs instead, well, I'm sorry, as far as we know right now, Link is not as good as Crumbs as a jungle, so immediately he'd fall down there. You know what I mean? That's the fair way to do it. So the reason I bring this up is because another one of these scenarios we can talk about now, Monty, is this story broke that Dade was approached by Cloud9, or there was some conversation went on there. Now listen, apparently he's not going to go to Cloud9, that's not on the table anymore, but just even as a hypothetical, it's kind of a cool idea, because on one hand, we all thought to ourselves, okay, Cloud9 is the only team who probably never will change players, they're also into the idea, but when you get the option to get Dade or Faker or Kakao, that's when you really do have to say, maybe it's worth even giving up synergy because you're getting that great a player, right? But a contingent factor to that is people said to themselves, well, we can't get rid of high shot calling. So everyone else apparently immediately bought into this notion, like, just put high as support. That'll work out well. That's like, to me, that blows my mind. Like, that's far from being a certain thing that high support would be really good, right? What do you think?
It's not a certain thing at all. But
would you risk it?
Yeah, I would, actually.
Okay.
That is actually a role swap that I would be willing to risk. If I could get Dade in mid, and Dade was committed to learning English and following shot calling, and I was convinced that Hai was motivated to develop as a support player, because that, we always have this conversation on the show. How can Cloud9 get better?
Yeah.
I think it's a gamble, but that is a way they could theoretically get better.
Okay, here's my take though. I actually agree that it's a gamble that it's not that it can't work, it could maybe, but my worries are two things. One, I don't know that Hai could play support properly enough. Just because he's a good mid laner doesn't mean he could play support. It's a very different role. And secondly, changing position, I don't know that you can just take the shot calling. Well, his shot calling will be the same as at mid. For all I know, a part of how his brain processes shot calling is his own way of playing mid. Maybe there's an aspect of how he's going to play the next move that builds into how he would shot call. So I don't know that the shot calling is equal. Like, the reason why I say the Dade move would be worth it is because let's say you had to remove Hai entirely. Your only option is remove Hai and put Dade totally in. I'd rather have the way better player and try and build new synergy and go a new style of shot calling, which is a gamble in itself, but with a potentially huge upside, even if it's not as certain, than what I had before, because the upside to that wasn't as good. Like, there was a ceiling that I was hitting there. So I actually think you could build a different type of synergy. It wouldn't be the same Cloud9, but it could be a different and possibly better one.
Possibly.
If they don't change team, and in theory maybe TSM will be better because now they've had more time with Lost Boy and they've had more time with Loco, and CLG's going to remake their lineup. Who the fuck knows what's happening to Dignitas, but Curse's gotten Piglet. This might sound like a bomber. Cloud9 is one of my favourite teams, Monty, but I actually got a bit depressed when I watched their Worlds, because I didn't feel like, if they'd got a bit different opponent, they could have beaten them and gone to the semis, and then who knows what could happen. I didn't think that. I actually watched it and I thought, wow, I just saw the absolute limits of Cloud9, good and bad. Like, I saw them have amazing games where they tested teams, and I saw them lose in a similar fashion to how they usually lose, and I actually feel like I have a really good sense of what this team's like, and I did get to see them fully try and implement everything on an international stage, and this team definitely cannot win the World Championship. I don't believe that Hai can improve and become so much better as a mid lane. I don't believe that Sneaky can become next level Uzi level. I think actually everyone's limits are sort of set. There's a bit of wiggle room here and there in the meta, but really they're about as good as they can be. Maybe with the perfect bracket they could go to the semis, but I think that's about it.
Right.
Was your sense similar?
Yeah, of course. So we always talk about Cloud9 saying that they're always going to be a good team, but they're never going to be a truly great team based on their current limitations, and they've kind of like hit their ceiling. They can be dominant in A. They have been dominant in A. They likely will continue to be dominant in A, especially because of all the other changes that are occurring. And, TSM, I don't even know what's going on over there. It looks like they got Santorin for the jungle, but that's another very young player. And I think what TSM lacks is like a seasoned and veteran shot caller on that team, and they haven't really fixed that problem yet. So that's, a little bit troubling for them at the very least. But the thing about TSM is that they're a good team now, and they're a good team with young players. So if they can hold on to these players for a while, then I think actually they can become like a very good team in the future. But that's still a ways out from happening, I believe.
You remember the hype at the beginning of last split, which was deserved, which is, wow, NALCS is going to be so competitive, as it was, because everyone upgraded, I mean, if you remember, famously, we made the point that the only team who hadn't upgraded was Curse, and then they were essentially given Special out of nowhere. So actually, every single team in some sense had done an upgrade. At least we thought, okay. So actually, here's the problem. If I look at NALCS as it is right now, and admittedly,
it's a mess.
I think almost every single team is worse. The only team I can think of who's better is Curse. And Cloud9's the same. Every other team looks worse. Listen, everyone can tell me the hype around Santorin or the one. I haven't seen anything yet. I've just saw him play on Challenger teams, and that's it. I can't say he's better than Amazing. For me, I'd say Amazing right now is better than Santorin. So that's already worrying me. Then you add in factors like Dignitas and CLG look like a complete mess right now because we don't even know who's on the teams, and it's hard to see how they're going to get big upgrades.
I also positions. My guess is Dignitas and CLG don't even know who's on the team.
No, so I think if you look across the board, and then, what other teams are better? Let me think.
Well,
LMQ's, they're in a lot of trouble.
Gutted, yeah, who the hell knows what's happening to LMQ.
And LCS looks bad at the moment.
It looks pretty bad. Especially too because a lot of the European players that were here that were in NA left to go back to Europe. So it looks like Europe's actually kind of getting stronger, if anything. Obviously we'll see where players like Amazing and Dexter and Crepo end up, but I actually think Crepo is probably. I don't know this. Crepo has told me nothing about this, but it wouldn't surprise me if Crepo and Reckless were to show up on Alliance next season. I think that would be a very strong team.
I think that would be bad.
Really?
Listen, I think Reckless joining the Alliance, that's a good move. It's worth the gamble, but I don't know why you would pair him with Crepo though.
I think Crepo is underrated as a player, and that he's a very mature player and a good team a good team player. And that he has the skills as well to back it up.
Okay, so, be all that as it may, didn't we just see Reckless play with Yellow Star, who is probably the best Western support? Crepo isn't better than Yellow Star.
Well, no, but I don't know.
What was even the hesitation there, Monty? Were you really weighing up whether Crepo is better than Yellow Star?
No, I agree that Crepo is not better than Yellow Star, but I don't know how individually mature Yellow Star is, and I don't know because Crepo's a really young guy, and I think that I also know that or Reckless is a young guy, and like Reckless, he had I think some issues with he's a very practice oriented player, and I think he had some issues with Fnatic. In terms of feeling like he was very dedicated to the team in a way that some of the other players were perhaps not. And I think that Crepo is also extremely dedicated to the game. Not to say Yellow Star isn't. These are just my opinions from observing Fnatic when I saw them right before Worlds. And Reckless is very emotional. And so Crepo, I think, could ground and kind of be an older figure to Reckless in a really good way. So I think that in and of itself is valuable and may cause Reckless to play even better than he does right now.
Here's something that people aren't going to like. They aren't going to like this opinion, Monty. I like Crepo, okay, and not only just as a person, as a player, actually. If you remember, back when Xpecial was benched or whatever, or he was removed from TSM, I actually mentioned, because if you remember, people said, oh, Crepo was seen at the TSM house. I actually said I thought that would be like a good move. Like, why not gamble and bring Crepo in? Because obviously he'd been stuck with Yellow Pete. We want to see him with a strong AD carry, which we've got to see in Altec later on. But okay, that was potentially a move that made sense. Someone with a bit of strategical nous, some experience. That's all great. But my point here is like, okay, some of those factors you mentioned there, One thing I'm actually going to disagree with you on is when you mentioned that like Crepo is sort of like a mature guy, an experienced guy. In one very specific sense, he is. Like, he has a lot of experience around the game. He's played with now a bunch of different players. He's also seen bad situations and good. I agree with all that. But actually, I think I'm the only person who read his Facebook post and actually took a bit of a negative perception of him away from it. Everyone else loved it, right? They were like, this is really well. I'm glad he came out and said all these things. But there was a couple of things in there I wanted to bring up since you mentioned this topic, okay? First of all, his tone in that Facebook post, he was being very honest, and I actually applaud that, okay? But there was actually quite a passive-aggressive tone to it, where a lot of it was kind of like throwing people under the bus. Like, listen, I like my manager here, but you know what? He couldn't manage this way, and he was kind of a failure in this sense. And there was this one key moment I remember in it, where he essentially suggested that, like, some of his teammates didn't duo queue with him. But he didn't say it like, I asked them to duo queue, and they said no. He said something like, it had been weeks, and I'd been noticing that they never asked me to duo queue, which is like, mate, if you're mature in that scenario, isn't it the other way around? Don't you ask, like, listen, this guy's not asking me, so I'll ask it. That's like there's something a little bit passive aggressive about that.
From what I'll let we'll have Crepo on the show, I think, at some point. He said he would come on the show after World, so we'll maybe next episode we'll have him on there and he can talk more about that. There is more to that story, I think. I do agree that his Facebook post was a little bit bitter, and I think it could have been done better in the way that he could have talked about what he ideally would have wanted out of a team more than just trying to pinpoint all the mistakes, and just try and take an approach where he lays out his idea about how EG could have worked better, instead of just trying to focus on all of the little things that went wrong. I do think that was not played the best.
Like, what I noticed in the post, okay, is something that actually, I'll give you a reference from my own life. A friend of mine in Counter-Strike was an in-game leader for many years for one of the best teams in the world. And when he was the leader, actually his teams were fairly successful for the skill level he had. They did quite well relative to that, and he was known as a good leader, and he was obviously a friend of mine. So in theory, you would think I would never criticize him and put all that shit. That's not my way of being a friend with someone. I am like quite honest, okay? And so one of the things I actually would criticize him to, and he even kind of admitted to, was that as a leader, one of the aspects of being a leader and being the mature man in the team that he didn't do a good job with, which once he retired he could look back on and see, was that he had that kind of approach, okay, where, because in his own game he would work to do these certain things that he thought were his responsibility and his duty, he expected teammates to do that, okay? So he expected that part of being a teammate is, if I ask you to do this as the in-game leader, then you just do it. And then if it fails, yeah, we can go and look at it. But you have to do what at least like give it a try, etc. And so there would be times when his teammates wouldn't execute a strategy he did. And he felt kind of like, oh, well, if you're not going to do that, then well, I did my part. So if it fails, okay. Whereas actually a really great leader and a really mature person would maybe see like, okay, you know what, maybe that guy actually is not capable of doing that. And so as a result, I asked him to do it the first time. Second time, okay, maybe it's on me. Like, maybe I should make it simpler. Maybe I should have to bridge the gap more. Now, listen, that's actually technically unfair. That person's now having to go above and beyond the Call of Duty to make up for something that a teammate's lacking, okay? But that's also part of being like a great leader and a really mature person. You know, you can sort of even go, okay, I'm even going to go outside my ego and go, okay, I shouldn't have to do this, but I will do it. So that's essentially what I'm criticizing here, is that, listen, I'm sure Crepo fulfilled his duty entirely as just a player in EG, doing his job, probably did his best, but there's an aspect there where that's why I'm mentioning it in the context of Alliance, because if you bring him onto a team with a guy Reckless, where one of the ways we've criticized him on this show, Monty, is that Reckless still has a gear left that he hasn't kicked into yet, where he's got all the skills and he has good performance, but there's something lacking about synergizing with his team. That was his problem with Fnatic. He was always the odd man out, even though he was a star player. He was never the star player in terms of star player of impact on the team, you know. Like, if you want to compare him to Deft was fantastic at synergizing with his team and providing what they needed and knowing where his weakness matches, you know, all that stuff. That's actually where Reckless probably needs either help or self-development, you know. So if we're going to pair him with someone, I'm just saying there, I don't know that it's as certain that Crepo will be the guy that can. He's not. I don't know if he'll take Reckless to the next level. Maybe.
I mean, I think he has the opportunity to, and you know, I do agree that Crepo's Facebook post was gives some level of concern about that. But I also, from my personal conversations, and he can, if he chooses to, elucidate on this, but like there were a lot of issues, I think, in the EG house, and I've talked to multiple EG players about this, and so I don't think that he didn't do the things that you're saying either. I think that he did try very hard and then got very frustrated.
Okay, fair enough. And by the way, the point I'm making here isn't that any of that wasn't justified, by the way. Like, a lot of it made a lot of sense. And by the way, I would want to air some of those things if I finally was out of my contract. That's all fine. But it's one of those scenarios, okay, where one of the problems with that is if I'm in his future team, now I'm going to kind of be worried about if we have any problems. Well, then what was he going to say when he leaves my team? Yeah, that is in the back of your mind when you take that approach of like sort of a little bit of scorched earth there, or I'm going to reveal stuff like that. That sort, like, I'm just saying, in that sort of a scenario, it's probably better to like. I'd have picked half of that stuff and revealed it, and some of it I'd have just thought like, what does this even benefit anyone to know?
Yeah.
Like, for example, the manager stuff, I'd have just left that out, and I just said, okay, there was problems with management stuff, but I wouldn't have like named names and said like, oh, he didn't do that, because that's not even constructive criticism at that point. That guy's not really probably going to do something based on that. He's just going to be like, come on, dude, you just blew me out completely. That's like. There's a degree to which you sort of just scoring points there, like, well, don't blame me for that, So anyway, we've covered that talk. I think it was a fair way to discuss it. Okay, let me think. Oh, by the way, also Evil Genius's team. There's another one that surely is going to be worse now in NALCS.
Yep, Pobelter, Helios, and Altec seem pretty committed to staying together, though. So we'll see how that goes.
By the way, have you watched these videos? Very funny videos, by the way, that HyperX did with Crepo, where it's Judge Jeff or whatever. Do you remember all those people, Monty, saying that Helios had really good English? What do you think of that? Do you think Helios has really good English, Monty?
Yeah, he does.
On a scale of 1 to 10, as a non-native speaker, where would you put him? 1 to 10?
6.
You just said he has really good... Mate, we know people in Korea, me and you, who are native Koreans, lived in Korea their whole life, who have wonderful English, right?
Yeah, a few.
You've already mentioned some of them. Mike, that guy from Invent, he has fucking awesome English.
Oh yeah, he's like he lived in North America.
So a lot of these people have lived in other... Okay, that's fine. But these people have really good English. Helios has good English for a Korean player who's lived his whole life in Korea. Yeah.
To be fair, in that video, Helios's English was nowhere near as good as it was. I actually taught Helios when he came back to get his visa. He was at the Korean regional matches, and I talked to him for a long time, and I thought it was perfectly fine.
Right, okay, so maybe it's better than that. Fair enough.
It is better than that.
Well, I think it was overblown a bit, though.
So. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I would say Helios, out of all of the Korean players that have moved to NA, has the best English.
Okay.
Maybe Seraph has better now, but...
Okay, I have another team for you that we need to talk about. It's EDG. So you guys did a fairly reasonable job on the actual Riot broadcast. I thought that was actually one of the more fair segments about the Chinese players. Was people were quite fair about discussing the Name issue, okay? Which was that no one did say, right, he's obviously shit since he did badly here, and it was all overrated, and why did we hype him and all. Everyone was kind of like, okay, he was good in LPL, he definitely was, and he is a top player just based on domestic results, but something happened here, and he kind of choked here, and that was because to me, I made the example like this. A lot of people, okay, brought up, and this time I'm bringing up the logic up so we can address it now. People think that actually we were unfair with how we treated Name by making those excuses for him and explaining why he did badly. Because they think, okay, it's like, when I criticised Link very heavily, and I said, it doesn't matter what Link did in the regular season, in the playoffs he always failed, right? The difference is, that's not what happened to Name. Name didn't do well in a regular... He did well in every domestic league ever in China. Amazingly, he just didn't do it well at the next level to that. That's true. It is one time at the next level he didn't do that much better. That's a bit of a different scenario.
It's the Dade situation. It's the same thing as Dade last year. Dade looked really, really good for a long time, choked at Worlds, choked way worse than Name did, by the way.
Yeah.
and came back and then continued to perform well for the entire year and had a semifinal appearance at Worlds. Did well by all standards. So whether Name will go back and continue to be at his old level or not, I mean, every year there's going to be a star player that will disappoint at the World Championship. That's just how it's going to be, you know. This year it was Name. Name has performed well in the regular season. He's performed particularly well in the playoffs, especially when you consider that Positive Energy kind of came out of nowhere and won LPL last year. And then when he's on EDG, won both seasons. Like, what more do you want from this guy? And it's just hilarious too, because the Korean fans in particular got very mad at me for rating Name so highly. But it was just the Korean fans who had never seen the LPL who just saw this performance. So I don't know. You watch him; he was obviously very good. He was obviously very good at LPL. He was obviously I wouldn't say he was bad at Worlds. He was just very mediocre.
I also find it kind of funny that, like, that's part of why people got mad as well, because they feel like he was overhyped because you know, people are a bit down on China as a region. But here's the problem with that logic: no one has a problem saying Uzi is amazing on one tournament that they've seen. He's from China, and presumably you guys all thought he was really good even before this tournament. And he's not Korean. Let me just reiterate again: he's not from Korea, the best region, not China. See what I'm saying there? Like, it's perfectly fine that if Uzi is a beast, which he clearly is, then he's allowed to be the best, but Name isn't. Like, it doesn't add up there. It's got to be consistent across the board.
Right, and I mean, Uzi only really shows up at Worlds. Like, he's not that good when he plays in LPL. I don't know what, like, switch flips in that kid's head at Worlds. Like, he was really good at Worlds this year, though. He was amazing.
So here's another piece of logic I have to address on that topic exactly there. People think again that I'm being unfair. I'm not using the Link logic. Well, it doesn't matter how he did in LPL. He did great at Worlds. No. It's that Link only does well in the regular season and not in the playoffs. If you're Uzi, you can't be good at 2 tournaments and then have a year off. You can't be the best in the world if you do that. There's a big difference. I hope I've made this distinction clear. There's a big difference between doing well in the regular season of your domestic league and owning all of your domestic league and then just doing badly at one international tour. Those aren't the same. Those should not be conflated as the same opinion.
Right.
Because I've got a similar player because we haven't talked about Blue yet, okay? So I actually have a way to link these two topics together that I think is pertinent, actually. So a player who didn't actually do that well at Worlds, who was awesome in the domestic league, was Deft. Now, he wasn't even close to as bad as the problems Dade had last year, and actually Dade was a bit underwhelming this year, but here's one of the reasons I want to ask why, Monty. Because if you think about it, part of why Blue was so amazing wasn't just that Dade and Deft are really amazing individual players, which they obviously are, by the way. It's that their team had, if you want to talk about Uzi getting a buff when he goes to Worlds, it seemed like Blue has a buff in that they were always strategically ahead of everyone, and they had a great team. So I feel like Deft and Dade's performances got elevated by that a bit, in a sense that the rest of the team were clearly, like Acorn looked way better in OGN, and Spirit looked way better. Notice how nearly all the players got a little bit of an individual decrease in the tournament. So actually, even though people thought it was ridiculous that I said I had Imp above Deft, remember, I'm not saying this to say I was right, but Imp was obviously much more effective at Worlds than Deft was. Do you think there was a component of why Deft was a little bit underwhelmed? Did you feel he was underwhelming at this Worlds?
He was underwhelming because he was not as consistent as he normally was, and his laning phase was quite poor. I mean, there were those games where, I mentioned this a lot on the broadcast, where he would deal more damage by himself than all of the players on the other team combined to champions. Like, he had ridiculously good games at Worlds. He also had some pretty poor games at Worlds. But to a certain extent, Deft is, he's always been bad in lane. We've seen semifinals where White has killed him 5 times in the laning phase in one game, and he still bounces back and manages to carry a game. Like, he can come back through his positioning and through his good skill shot dodging and his decision making about where to set up for team fights. So Deft was a little bit underwhelming, especially in the series against White. Up until that point, however, I think he played pretty well. Not like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like Deft's very best play. I think he was probably overall in this tournament like a 7.
I've got an abstract question about maybe strategy in LoL or the comps that were played or something about the meta at Worlds. Is this correlation just a coincidence? Think about this, Monty. Coming into Worlds, very few people would have actually said that Imp and Uzi were the best AD carries in their region. Very aggressive AD carries, like to win lane, trade hard, get kills in lane. This sort of style, they're going to have their supports pick champions that can actually allow them to do that and bully the lane. Meanwhile, the players we thought were the best AD carries from their regions, Name and Deft, were actually the stay safe, play more passive lane style, get to the late game, then do output in the team. Is it a coincidence that the two aggro ones were the ones who did way better at this Worlds, and the two passive ones actually were the ones who, in general, to differing degrees, underperformed? Is that just a coincidence, do you think?
This is going to be interesting. I think that is a symptom of the change in the mid lane meta. Because a lot of the old mid laners that were good, like, Dade's Ziggs, where he did exceptionally well in team fights, and these kind of like AoE mids. And we have to remember when Samsung Blue was at their peak, these 5v5 team fighting compositions were the most powerful things you could play. You have like the Maokai running around in there. You have a big AoE damage mid laner, things like that. And so when we switched back to more single target damaged mid laners or assassin mid laners, the playmaking AD carries like Twitch that can deal burst damage synergize so well for creating pick comps around these assassins that it increases their effectiveness quite a bit. And some of these more immobile AD carries that are designed for team fighting, like Kog'Maw, that Twitch, or like Kog'Maw that Deft is like super good on, become a lot more of a liability because they are able to be caught out very easily by these assassin mids, and it makes it harder for him to position in team fights when he can get 100-0'd by an enemy mid laner. So I think actually mid lane meta is a big part of the reason why we saw these playmaking AD carries, because they could synergize really well with the mids on roams, and they weren't as reliant on the entire team synergy.
And by the way, just a callback from memory, I actually think that in the top 21, I even said something along the lines of when we ranked our top 20 players. I even said, I even admit Deft did play better than Imp previously, but I said this as a context. I know that Imp's good on all these champions. Okay, he's good on Caitlyn, he's good on Vayne, he's also decent on he was pretty good on Kog'Maw as well. But the difference was, I said, what will happen when we see Deft not on Kog'Maw, or we see him have to go away from Twitch to these other champions, which is kind of what you saw at Worlds. It was all Tristana, it was Caitlyn, it was Lucian. Actually, there wasn't so much of the Kog'Maw style approach. No,
but there was a lot of, it was mostly Twitch from Deft and Imp throughout the tournament. It was a lot of Twitch. It was some Corki, and Deft's Corki's really good too.
Yeah.
So
on those lines then, it's very easy because Shield underwhelmed for people now to rewrite history. Remember, coming into Worlds, everyone was raving about Shield. Oh, they're going to be awesome, amazing. I don't want this to sound like we're just going to rewrite history, but knowing what you know now, if SK Telecom had gone instead of Shield, and so Piglet can play Corki, can play his Twitch even, which he was pretty good on towards the end, would this have actually been a good meta for SK Telecom, bizarrely?
Yes, because Faker could play Assassins again.
Do you think they would have done better than Shield?
Maybe. They still had some pretty big issues, I think, especially with Mondu, and especially with the constantly losing the bottom lane, and they also weren't the best team in the lane swap. So I don't really think they would have done a whole lot better than Shield. I don't think any Korean team really would have done. Another Korean team would have guaranteed done better than Shield. KT Arrows, either they make the finals or they fall out in the group stage, right? They're just so inconsistent that who knows what the hell would have happened to them either. I'm not convinced that they would have done better than Shield.
Do you think that Blue as a team, maybe from inexperience, do you think they choked a little bit in their games? Or to me, there's something they didn't have that decisive quality that they had in the OGN games. Like in the OGN games, I used to actually root against Blue, because usually I used to watch LSK Telecom. I used to want to see them win, or even I wanted to see White win. And so I used to watch Blue like, fuck, why are they so good? How are they doing this? Like, always the right decision. This is bullshit. It was the opposite in Worlds. I was like, what the fuck? Where is Blue? Like, this is bizarre. They got to the semi-finals and I feel like they're kind of underwhelmed.
Yeah, well, I think that they had a pretty strong run up until the semifinals, but just in general, I think there were this is my observation from the outside, I think there were some issues with Blue that were happening within the team at the time. Like I remember, I was in the hotel and I came out into the lobby late at night, the night before the blue versus white, and Spirit was sitting in the lobby, and I started talking to him, and he looked really upset, and he didn't look very confident about their match versus white the next day, and pretty distracted. So it seemed to me that there was maybe some internal issues between the players that were happening at the time. I don't know what exactly he was upset about, but he was definitely upset.
Oh, actually, one thing we should have mentioned on the white issues, let's talk about it now, is that, right, in terms of historical context, I think we have to say something about the fact that the Imp Mata bot lane, as far as we know, is broken up now. Where would Monty put them? Is this the greatest bot lane of all time?
I don't know. Mondu and Piglet, when they were at their peak, were really good. But they also fell off really hard. And we never really saw Imp and Mata fall off.
I mean, the longevity is pretty insane.
It's pretty impressive. So, I mean, I think probably overall in terms of skill, it's pretty good. You may have to talk about like Wei Zhao and FCZF a little bit in that conversation.
They had their time for sure, like a little stretch of, I think it was about 5 months or something.
I'm sure some people would want to include Doublelift and Chaucer in that conversation, but for me, that was before competition got truly international, so it's kind of not relevant.
Plus, I think those people are mainly Doublelift and Chaucer. No, anyway, so
I think probably that's like a fair statement to make.
So here's my question to you. It sounds, at least what's currently being said, like actually there's a decent chance maybe Mata will just be done. Maybe he's just retired and he'll be a coach or whatever. But it sounds like he won't be a player in the same sense. It's not certain that Imp will be actually. He really did just say he's taking a rest. If Imp plays but without Mata, now in theory we've seen this before, Monty. He used to be the lone star of Blue back in the day when everyone else was terrible. What would you imagine an Imp in a world without Mata is like? What do you think? How do you think he could do?
Like above average, but I don't think he's going to be as spectacular as he was. I think there's a lot of rising talent in terms of AD carries in Korea. I think OQ is really good. So I think, I think Captain Jack is actually a lot better than a lot of people give him credit for as well these days. I think he fixed a lot of his issues. So I think it'll be harder for him. He really needs to find a decent support. And I think that part of what made Imp and Mata both so successful was that they had this kind of relationship, like sort of like vaguely antagonistic towards each other, where it seemed like they were oddly competitive or like they would trash talk each other all the time. And I think that for both of those guys and their personalities, that kind of environment kind of pushed them to be the best, because they were in some weird way competing against each other all the time. Yeah. And for those specific players with those specific personalities, that really worked out. So I think it's going to take somebody with a very strong personality to be able to deal with him. And so he's going to have to find somebody like that.
So let me think of another team to talk about. Okay, so you mentioned before the possibility of Reckless going to Alliance, and maybe he'd be with Crepo, or we don't know what the scenario would be there.
I found Nif extremely underwhelming at Worlds. I thought his Zillion play was just awful.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't surprise me if Alliance was looking to replace Nif, because
that was also a bit.
He was just kind of like a non-factor throughout most of that tournament.
To be fair, Nif can play a lot of champions. That's like one of the few he can't. So I think that was also a little bit unlucky that happened to be like the flavor of the month going into the tournament.
Yeah, it was real bad though.
Fair enough. Okay. But that leaves a hole in Fnatic, okay. Now, we don't know what the Fnatic lineup is, obviously, but let me just ask it like this. Without Reckless, can Fnatic be better? Is it even possible than the team they had before? Because the team they had before was a pretty good team. It beat Blue, it came second overall in the league. Obviously, before that, it won the split. Like, does this mean Fnatic starts to slide downhill a bit now that they've lost Reckless? If they have, in speculation land.
Maybe. It's hard to say with Fnatic, though, because I feel like Fnatic's performance is not an indicator of their raw talent, but almost always an indicator of their work ethic. I think that Fnatic, when they want to be good, is very good, and when they don't care so much, they tend to be pretty bad. And so I think that they're just not willing to work up to their skill ceiling a lot of the time. So with the right AD carry, I think they could certainly be a great team again if they have a more consistent work ethic. And the other problem with Fnatic is they're just constantly like, it's like the players I think are so powerful within that organization that they just like have this like revolving door of coaches. Like RNA is gone now. Oh, they got toys to coach them for Worlds. It's like so random what's going on. And I understand why every season they just get like a new coach. It's like, it's not really a scenario that's going to set you up for success to constantly be changing your support staff. And I don't think any team has changed support staff as much as Fnatic has. It's really bizarre.
To me, that's the big issue, actually. It was never really the players. They were one of those teams who had an abundance of... They actually probably had too much talent. They had all this talent. They just couldn't find like what was their identity and how were they going to adapt to... That was their two big problems. Make the most of the talent, adapt to different metas, etc. They used to just sit around like, when's our meta? Like autumn or something? It's summertime? I guess we're just out of luck here now. And then they'd hope it'd come around, whereas the good teams figure out a way to make it work in each time period, you know. So actually, here's the weird thing, okay? Of all the teams in the whole Western world, to me, Fnatic are the most uncoachable team that exists. Now, I'll stop you right there, Monty. I realise you were the coach of CLG. I realise, like... don't jump in too fast there. I realize you might be under a contractual obligation to not actually say anything right now, but jokes aside, of all the really good teams, I actually think they're the most uncoachable because, like you're saying here, there is some weird sense that the players have some kind of power that either puts them at the level of the coach or above the coach, and that's not a good scenario for a coach scenario. Like I was mentioning before, there's a degree to which if you're going to have everything, like as every coach, okay, is going to get some of the blame if their team loses. If you're going to get the blame, the upside of that should be you actually got to implement what you wanted to do, so you're getting the blame for something that's correct, right? That's the worst scenario. If you're the coach, you get blamed and you didn't even do what you said. Like, what the fuck?
I know that feel.
Because the problem in this scenario is, I don't even think it's entirely their fault. Like, I don't think there's some shadowy cabal, like all the Fnatic players get together like, fuck this coach, we're not going to do it. I think it's more just like, in the West in general, this is the thing we still haven't gotten over. Like, truly, the most of the teams, the players have a lot more say than even people would think in public. Like, I think the only one I can think of that, like, I'll give credit here. The only team I can think of in the whole West that the players don't seem to have more say than a lot of the staff and the owners and the coaches and stuff is TSM, actually.
Yep.
And that's just because in TSM, I mean, there's a negative side to it. In TSM, there's a perception at all times that if you do anything that Reginald doesn't like, we'll kick you the fuck out. So, but that actually puts the fear of God in people. Whereas in these other teams, I don't know anything behind the scenes. But if I had to speculate, I'd say that Expeke has a lot more control over Fnatic than Fnatic has over Expeke because he is their number one branded person. And if they lose him, even if they got a player as good, he's not going to be as famous as Expeke, as loved by Expeke. So actually, Expeke has the leverage over him. Whereas actually what's funny is, no matter who you are in TSM, Reginald's done a good job actually of making sure that the brand of TSM is way bigger than you are, whoever you are. It doesn't matter. You can be Darius, you can be Reginald himself, you can be X-Special. No one's brand is bigger than TSM. So actually, in a weird way, the hierarchy's sort of right in TSM, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely to TSM's credit. I think TSM may have issues in the future because of how young the management is in recruiting older players or older coaches. But in terms of what they've done with the brand and kept the power in the brand itself, as opposed to the players, and the way that they're able to maintain order at the current time is quite good.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that's a relevant topic with Fnatic, is that, I mean, listen, people thought you were being glib. I think it was you who said a comment along the lines of like, well, Fnatic made it to the semifinals with Pushu, and they made it, they only made it in groups here, like as if to say, like, it's not that, like, they weren't good before or whatever. Like it wasn't necessarily down to the players. Okay, but it's true to a degree. Listen, Pushu is quite clearly not as good in AD carries records. That's not what we're saying here at all. But like I said before, it's not like Reckless was having some incredible game impact every time. So actually, it's not like Reckless was getting the most out of being Reckless within the team. I actually think, I hope this isn't a controversial opinion, I actually think it's better for Reckless and Fnatic that they part ways, if they indeed have. I actually think Reckless would be better off, well, the short way to put it is he needs to shit or get off the pot. Like, either he's going to go somewhere and adapt and just become a supportive, okay sort of AD carry, or he's going to become the star, have a team built around him. Great, go for it. But in Fnatic, he was like in a halfway position. And I'm not sure Fnatic knew what they wanted from him either. They just were kind of settling for whatever they had.
Yeah.
Can Fnatic keep Soaz and Expeke and become a great team again? Do you think that's still something that can be recreated?
Like I said, it's at the mercy of their motivation. So yes, if they're motivated, but I don't think that Fnatic, with their current roster, will ever be great because of their infrastructure or because of their coaching or because, that's not what leads them to success or failure.
Expeke was actually surprisingly good at Worlds. What did you think?
Hey, he played well. He played well.
Seemed like he was better than he was in any of the LCS form until very early in the year, actually. Got to give him props.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there was a certain degree of, the first game that Blue played against Fnatic, the one where Blue lost, Dade was walking in front, in front of his creeps. It was Zed versus Ari, and he was spamming /laugh and getting hit by Charm. Like, he was literally just walking up, and Dade's a very cocky player, and that was one of the reasons why they lost that game, was because Dade was doing shit like that. So I think Expeke played well. I think that Dade doing dumb shit made Expeke look better.
Okay, I want to ask you a question, actually. I actually made a comment during Worlds, before the final even happened, I think, that I said that actually, just due to the history of how people tend to vote for MVPs, it was actually quite unlikely that Mata would win MVP, because unfortunately, part of being a great support is essentially that you sort of set up your carries to win the whole game. That's part of what you do. So unfortunately, almost by definition, if you have an amazing support run, you'll make at least one of your carries look so amazing that they'll probably win the MVP. That's an unfortunate way that the people look at the flashy play. So you're not really going to be the one dishing a lot of it out, okay? But amazingly, he actually did win the MVP. That didn't turn out to be a problem. I want to make this question to you. I know you're a huge fan of Mata, and I think you even predicted he would be MVP. I can't remember. I think you picked Dandy, actually, no. So that was my question, actually, along those lines. I actually think you could make a really interesting case for this tournament, where it's not certain that Dandy or MVP was Dandy or Mata was the MVP. I think you could make a case for each.
Yeah, you can.
Different grounds.
100%.
So actually, in a weird way, the fact that Dandy didn't get the MVP, it wasn't unfair because Mata deserved it, but I think also Danny deserved it in a weird way. They could have been co-MVPs to me.
Yeah, and they could have been co-MVPs. And I think the biggest reason to argue about co-MVPs is that they have such insane synergy. If you watch the way White plays, Dandy and Mata are constantly moving in to get vision together in the enemy jungle. They control vision as a pair very well. And it's always something that they're doing in unison and they're very coordinated on. So it takes both of them to have that level of vision dominance, which is why it made it such a difficult decision. The thing about Dandy is he can just snowball ridiculously, and he can single-handedly win you games. Mata can to a certain degree. Partially that's limited by his role, of course, as a support player. But I mean, he played amazingly well in terms of snowballing lanes during lane swap situations also. So I think it was a really narrow call in the end, and I'm kind of sad that there wasn't I'm trying to remember when we actually did the voting for MVP during the World Finals, when everybody was being pulled. It was actually dead tied, and it was dead tied, and so there had to be. I think somebody ended up changing their vote as a tiebreaker. I don't remember who it was though. I voted for Dandy.
Because I had Dundee as well. No slight against Matter. I just thought that, like, well, one of my factors is the difference is there were other support players who played very well, but no jungler came even in the same universe.
That was kind of my logic as well. Is that the gap between him and the next jungler was insane.
Yeah.
So
can't even no. There was no gap like that in the whole tournament at any position to me.
And Mata obviously was the best support player, but Gorilla had some really standout games. Cloud had some good games, like standout games. Even Zero had some very good games as well. But nobody could even touch Dandy in that tournament.
Sure. So, because actually that leads to an interesting point. Okay, Mata maybe won't play again, like I mentioned. But actually, it sounds like Dandy might go to China. He might play there. So we will actually get a chance to see what is Dandy like without Mata. Because here's an interesting thing that you'd mention. You'd think usually that, like, the jungler could make the support a lot better, actually, if he comes and ganks his lane, has a great synergy with him in that sense. But actually, that's an area where I've always felt like if I was an opposing jungler and I played Dandy and people were ranking me and me and Dandy and they were saying Dandy was better, I'd sort of be like, he's really good, but that's bullshit. Because if I'm the jungler, I have to place my deep wards, then I have to go to the other side of the jungle and place wards there. Dandy's like, well, I'll place my wards at the top half of the map, and then Mata goes deep in and places that, like, pink ward on that, like, brush outside the enemy red on bot side. Like, I don't even do that. The support does that.
Well,
I'd like to have that luxury as well.
Right, and that comes to Mata's, like, great timing. And yeah, Dandy definitely plays with a lot more information than most junglers due to Mata's exceptional vision control. That's true. Like, he has more knowledge to work with.
Like since we mentioned bot lanes before, there's no combo in history for vision control that was better than those two combined. Because every other team had like one. Like, listen, Mad Life used to be a beast at vision control, okay, but he didn't have some godlike jungler who was mirroring him. No one's had that matchup. That's what made White in general so insane.
Well,
was that every other team,
Bondu and Bengi were pretty good together too.
Okay, sure, but I mean every other team almost in history. This is why I made the Looper case. Every other team usually had like its stars at certain positions. Then it had like a couple of weaknesses it had to cover. And if you're lucky, maybe your star covers this weakness, or maybe the support player covers a weakness of the star, and that all works out in that sense. White's the only team I can think of where I'm looking at the team and I'm like, where the fuck are the weaknesses? There's no actual weaknesses in the roster. That might be the only team in history that was the case for.
No, they just beat themselves by getting too cocky.
To a degree, yeah. Here's the weird thing, though. I've now been totally mind-fucked by White. Because I told you that the reason why I had to predict White to win, even though I couldn't quite explain it myself, is because I still don't understand how White ever lost to Blue in any of those semi-finals. Like, here's the thing, Ronnie, this really happens. There's series I go and watch, okay? I think I've told this story before. One time, on a vacation, I took a rare vacation off for a whole week. And so, for fun, because this is the sort of thing I do, Monty, for fun, I rewatched Blaze's 13-0 run through OGN. Of course I did. That's what I did on my vacation, okay? So here's the sad part. When I was watching it, I joked to someone on Skype, like, obviously I'm going to cut it off after the semi-final, and that'll be it. I'll have enjoyed myself. But there was a part of me when I was watching it, this is just what it's like to be in my mind, okay? That was like, even though I know what happens in the final, this is so good that there's a part of me feels like if I watch it, they're actually going to win the final. Like, and I started watching it, and I was like, yeah, it's going badly, but after all I've seen, they're going to turn it around. And even though I know they can't. So in the same sense, if I go back now and watch those White versus Blue semi-finals in OGN, I'm like, well, White should win this. So here's what doesn't make sense, Marty. Now that I have seen White win it and dominate everyone, now I want to ask you this question. Why couldn't they just do that all this year?
Because they weren't as good at lane swaps as Blue back in the day. And also, it was the team fight meta, and they're just not as good at team fighting a team as Blue is. Especially when Dade has like crazy AoE champs. So
the trick was to just never ever get to a late game team fight by smashing the shit out of everyone in laning phase in the first 10 minutes. Okay. Well, if it was that easy, then we should have just done that earlier on, I guess. Yeah. Who knew, Bonnie? It's an easy strategy when you know it.
Well, Pawn and Looper also developed their champion pools quite a bit over time in order to be able to smash lane very efficiently. Before, like, Pawn would just like play a bunch of Orianna and shit. And yeah, Orianna you can play aggressively, but you can't just like straight up kill people in lane like you can on some of his other champions. So.
On Twitter, Monty, people get sometimes mad because my style, if I'm posting something sarcastic, is that I don't break character at all, and I post it with like just like dripping with vitriol, and I obviously couldn't believe that. But I'm not very good at doing that actually in person. Like on the show, I always sort of give away my hand that I obviously don't believe that. So I'm gonna now tell you that I'm gonna troll you, Monty, which is that. Well, what do you mean? Like Pawn improved? Like Pawn is better than Faker? Didn't you see Worlds?
No, he's not. Faker's still better, but Pawn is really good. Pawn is probably top. He's probably top 3 mid. But no, Faker is still Faker. That doesn't change.
If Pawn has gone and Dandy's gone and Cacao is gone and Piglet's gone and Dade's gone, shouldn't in theory Faker just run rampage over whatever is left of OGN now?
Well, that's what I think.
That's stand up to him now.
Well, Rookie is gone too. Rookie was a player who could theoretically stand up to Fakers. So
not
yeah,
really relevant, but okay.
Well, he's going to China. Anyway,
no, I'm joking that he couldn't stand up to Faker anyway. It's like, okay, Monty, I know in your world that means something. Stay on topic. We're talking about Dade and Pawn,
So in that case, yeah, I mean, I think Faker with the right players around him, which is why I'm an advocate of pairing him with Wolf and Bang, because I think you just build a very stable team around Faker and just let Faker go nuts. That's what I would do.
So basically what we want to do is create an SK Telecom version of Season 2 CLG EU, where the whole plan is just go even, let the mid lane smash everyone's head in. Just don't ever die bot lane. That's your only job.
Well, yeah, except I think that Bang is way better than Yellow Pete was. So.
Plus, Snoopy is a lot better than Bengi, so... Anyway, there's the ultimate... That's probably the biggest diss I've ever said on this whole show ever, Monty. Bengi is a world champion and a winner of OGN. That's the most disrespectful thing I've ever said. I should be fired. Too late. Anyway, so... Actually, I have a question for you. Here's a good speculatory topic. If you had to predict, knowing what you know now about roster moves, so maybe more will happen, maybe some of them won't happen, maybe some of these players actually will just sign again with OGN teams, we don't entirely know. If you had to guess, now that some of these star names are out of the way, pick a player in OGN who now will, due to the vacuum, he's the guy who you'd pick as I think he's the most likely to step forward and become the next star because of the talent moving away, Who would you pick?
Swift.
He's going to be the next god tier jungler.
His mechanics are so insane, and he was getting substantially better in terms of his decision-making as well. Also, Chaser, another jungler, the generic stealth jungler, I think is getting really good quietly. And Fly may end up being a really good mid laner on the stealths as well. So we'll have to see. I think Jin Air did a really good job of finding some amateur talent and developing it. And I think that we're really going to see that if they stay in the scene for this next season. Chaser and Fly, both, I think, are really good in theory. OQ is going to be good.
People will think I'm cheating when I say this, but just in the context of the absolute best, no one knows yet what's happening with Gorilla. He's left Najin. If he joins another Korean team, well, if Mata's gone now, to me, Gorilla can just become overall the best support in the world.
Possible. We'll see. He definitely has that edge. And people were, I think, confused as to why Gorilla was let go. Let me explain this. If you didn't watch NLB and you didn't see, in NLB, Sword 3-0'd Shield. Before Shield went on their insane run at the regionals. Kane and OQ are a really good bottom lane, and they've got great synergy together. And when CLG was out in Korea scrimming, I know it was Double Lift and Afro. That was one of the few lanes that in the laning phase gave them trouble, and they really enjoyed playing against was Kane and OQ. So they're working out really well together as a duo right now. So it doesn't really surprise me that they would release Gorilla, just because I think they have a really good thing going there already. And so I think it's more of a synergy issue than an actual individual skill issue, because I think that Gorilla, Kane's old. He's 28. So to me, it wasn't about the individual skill of Gorilla. It was about the fact that Kane and OQ work so well together. And they have fantastic laning phase. They've been playing real well. So I think that was actually the right decision if they only wanted to keep one support player. And it also frees up Gorilla to go, be a star on another team. So that's cool too.
So let me think. I tell you what's so bizarre. Here's another upside I've just thought of all the fucked up roster moves. If they both get into LPL, I complained before that, okay, let's say Swift becomes the next squad tier jungler. We'll never know how he matches up against Dandy and Cacao. Here's an upside I've thought of, Monty. First of all, we might actually still see Dandy and Cacao play each other. And secondly, now we'll get to see Dandy without Mata and that superstar team play against Cacao. So now if Cacao really is better, maybe we'll actually get to see. That would be an interesting matchup, right?
It'd be great, yeah. I mean, I love watching both of those guys play. They're like my two favorite players to watch in the world. So I'm pretty disappointed that. Well, I don't even know if I'm not going to be able to cast them. We also have to talk about the possibility that what happens if these teams don't make LPL? Does that void their contract immediately? Do they just return to Korea and get picked up by another team instantly? I don't know the answer to that. It's possible. You know what I mean? Maybe they have an out clause in their contract where if they're not competing in the LPL, they have the opportunity to break their contract and then they can just waltz right back into Korea and be picked up by a team immediately. So it's so unclear what is happening right now that it's really hard to speculate on where, even if these players are going to China, because apparently the information about Dandy and Pawn going to IG is incorrect. So.
You know what? That's made me realize, Monty. I've always tried to say, listen, calm down, everyone. Esports isn't a real sport yet, but I've realized the media are lying about transfers. The organizations are corrupt. Owners are trying to pay players less than they're really worth on the market value. There's a lot of fans that are just idiots and bandwagoners and homers. Esports is a real sport, man. Anyway, the final shot at everyone in the whole industry there. I think we've pretty much covered everything. Anything left on the docket you want to discuss?
I don't know. We haven't kind of gone over. I guess Gambit, Kuban left. I mean, Alex Ich may be back on that team. That's kind of whatever.
I like the way Alex Ich. He really is a master of manipulating people's emotions. Did you see that sort of troll hint he gave where he was I will drop a hint, I will fish a hint for you, and then he put a picture out that was of him playing Fnatic Cartha skin with a Gambit icon. So he's which will it be? It might be neither either. He's just fucking with people. And so people initially just saw the Fnatic, they were he's joined a Fnatic, and then someone was but the Gambit icon. So the clever thing is you've actually given no information whatsoever there, but you've made people think you have. Let me ask you that then. Let's speculate. Would Alex Ich top lane of Gambit make any sense?
Maybe. I mean, he wasn't too impressive in his top lane performances previously, but if he can, I don't know. I don't know enough to actually have an opinion on that.
The problem with a lot of the reason why we haven't brought up some of the transfers here, by the way, is the ones that aren't actually even complete, or the ones where the team still has a lot to change. It's actually hard to even speculate. How can anyone talk about Dignitas when you don't know who the top laner and the AD carry is? That's pretty big. By the way,
yeah.
That reminds me. I've just thought up a topic right there, Monty.
We don't even know technically if Zion's leaving, right?
Perhaps. So here's an insane scenario for me, Monty. I just can't even understand this whatsoever. Okay. So when it was announced, those players that were re-signed, because remember the way Dignitas did it to sort of draw attention was technically everyone's contracts ended, and then they were going to sign the players. So technically they could have just signed everyone again, and it'd have been a big troll, right? But they were okay, Crumbs is signed. Yep, I'm on board with that, loving that. Shift is signed. Okay, I get it. You invested a lot. You want to see how it goes still. Maybe it could even be good. That was not a bad signing. Okay. I'm a Cutie Pie's left. Okay, maybe his time was up. I think he probably is. You've seen about the best of his competitive drive. Not really much point in keeping him. Zion Spartan we don't know about. Here's where I'm really confused, Monty. Good news, everyone. We've re-signed Kiwi Kid. What? Wasn't he only on the team because he was I'm a cute person? Now I don't even understand anything. Now up is down and I don't know what's going on now.
That could have been a place that Crippa ended up too. I think the Kiwi is weird. That's
I
a
feel
weird
like,
re-signing.
I feel like Dignitas could have been the winners of this offseason. Like, to me, think of some of the moves we're hearing about behind the scenes of, like, okay, Tabs has just been, in theory, either benched or he's apparently maybe a free agent now, something along those lines. So we live in a world where you could have gotten Crepeau and Tabs, or maybe you could have gotten Tabs and someone else, or you could have gotten Forgiven and someone else, or you could have got, who knows, maybe you could have got a Piglet. There was lots of options here. The idea that you haven't got an AD carry yet, but you've bought into another year of Kiwi Kid, I don't know what the upside of that is.
I don't know either. The one thing that they could be thinking is that Kiwi was somehow negatively affected by Cutie Pie, and that he hasn't actually hit his skill ceiling, and that without Cutie Pie,
Okay.
that's the only reason that I can think of.
Someone please get that picture where I put it up of Faker with like all those chains and like Bengi and them holding him down, but put Kiwi Kid there and put all the other members of Dignitas like chaining him down like from unleashing his potential. Because that's the new image I need.
Oh, that's the only logic I can think of there. Right? I mean, that has to be
unless here's another logic to use, like another reference to an old joke from the show. So you remember that it turned out that Genja was the secret owner of Gambit. Like, obviously, Kiwi Kid is the secret, like, shadow in majority stockholder of Dignitas, and the whole time that's why he was in there.
I see. So Odie's behavior is just to distract from the real owner of Dignitas.
Yeah, well, that's obviously a front, you know, man. He's like an agent provocateur. He's just sent out to cause trouble and like make you think he's one hand draws attention away from what the other hand is doing. Like, that couldn't be a real owner, Monty. Come on, it's so obvious, you know. Why do you think he behaved that way? Came in our chat. Now we love you, Odie, and like, you know, we're glad that everything's good now. I actually think he's all right. I don't mind. I don't really hate anyone, Monty. Except a few people on TSM, but enough said about that. I don't really hate them that much. I just think they're idiots. But okay. Was there anything else? I think that's about everything. I think we've covered quite a lot there. Also, the show is back now, so we'll do it regularly.
Yay!
We'll have time to talk about other roster moves. Let's just end it there. Actually, no. Wait a second. It's a new era, Monty. I don't know what YouTube channel this will be on yet, so here's all you have to do, people. It's only a VOD, so go to the YouTube channel it's on and subscribe to that, whatever it may be. Subscribe to our Twitters.
We're really well organized here on Something Inside.
Totally sorted, yeah. Go to these Twitters, add those. If you're not already on them, then well, you're going to enjoy my Twitter. I'll tell you that right now. It's going to be a lot of fun right there. Go to the Facebook page, all that good stuff. We'll be back next week, I hope. That's it for now. Goodbye, everyone.